Hi guys, tonight we're slipping into the complete history of sugar, that tiny white crystal that seems innocent until you notice it has quietly rearranged farms, ships, empires, kitchens, and probably your grandmother's biscuit tin. What did people crave before sweetness sat politely in bowls on every table? What did a world taste like when honey was treasure, ripe fruit was seasonal magic, and sugar itself was almost unimaginable? You stand beneath warm leaves, hear insects humming in the dusk, smell damp earth and crushed grass, and feel the air cling softly to your skin. Somewhere, long before factories and candy shops, sweetness is hiding in flowers, figs, dates, and golden combs guarded by very opinionated bees. So, before you settle into the story, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, and tell us in the comments where you're listening from, and what your local time is. Now, dim the lights, and let yourself step into a much older evening, when the human search for sweetness begins not in a shop, not in a plantation, not in a packet, but in the slow, patient noticing of the natural world. You walk through a landscape where sweetness is rare enough to feel like a secret. There is no sugar bowl waiting beside a cup, no spoon disappearing into tea, no bright wrapper promising a quick reward. The sweetness you know is scattered, brief, and alive. It ripens on trees, thickens inside roots, drips from flowers, or glows inside honeycomb. You learn to look carefully. A dark fig softened by sun, a cluster of dates hanging high in dry heat, a wild berry staining your fingers. These small gifts matter. In prehistoric and ancient societies, sweetness usually comes from fruit and honey. Honey is one of the oldest sweet foods humans used, and evidence from ancient art and archaeology shows that people gathered it thousands of years ago. You can imagine the courage required. Someone climbs toward a hive with smoke curling upward, bees vibrating like a tiny angry orchestra. Because apparently humanity saw a buzzing cloud of needles and thought, yes, dessert. Gentle sarcasm aside, honey is worth the risk. It keeps well, tastes intense, and feels almost otherworldly. You hold a piece of comb in your hand. It is warm and waxy, slightly sticky against your palm. The smell is floral, grassy, faintly animal. When you bite, the sweetness floods your mouth with a richness that ordinary fruit cannot match. This is not the neat, clean sweetness of refined sugar. It has layers, pollen, smoke, sun, and hive. It belongs to place. Honey from one valley tastes different from honey gathered near another river. Long before labels and luxury branding, bees are already doing regional flavor profiles, and no one has asked them to calm down. Fruit offers another kind of sweetness, but it keeps its own calendar. You cannot demand grapes in every season. You wait, you watch. You notice the changing color of skins, the softening of flesh, the smell of ripeness rising in warm air. The world teaches patience through appetite. A sweet taste is tied to weather, soil, insects, harvest, and luck. When a child finds berries along a path, that sweetness is not casual. It is an event. In some ancient cultures, sweetness also carries meaning beyond taste. Honey appears in offerings, medicines, and preservation. Egyptians used honey in food and ritual life, and it was valued enough to travel through trade. In India, the Middle East, China, Africa, Europe, and the Americas, people knew local sweet plants and fruits, each with its own season and story. The exact details vary widely, because history at this early age is not a tidy cupboard. Historians still argue whether some ancient references to sweet reeds describe true sugarcane, other syrup-producing plants, or simply poetic language that got a little too enthusiastic. You continue walking as dusk cools the ground. The air smells of leaves, smoke, and ripe fruit fallen somewhere nearby. Under your bare feet, the soil is uneven, A branch brushes your arm. You hear water moving slowly over stones, and in the distance someone cracks nuts beside a small fire. This is a world where taste is physical work. Sweetness must be found, climbed toward, gathered, guarded, dried, fermented, or shared quickly before it spoils. Nothing about it is automatic. There is a quiet social history here. Sweet things create moments of exchange. A handful of dates offered to a traveller, honey stirred into a healing drink, dried figs packed for a journey, fruit laid out at a feast. These foods do not merely feed the body, they mark care, status, hospitality, and memory. When sweetness is scarce, giving it away says something. It says, "You are welcome." It says, "This day is special." It says, "I could have eaten this myself, but look at me being civilized." And yet, the human body is ready for sweetness. You taste ripe fruit, and your senses wake. Sweetness often signals energy, especially in a world where calories are not guaranteed. This does not mean ancient people are wandering around having modern nutritional debates under a tree. They are living closer to hunger, labour, and season. A sweet mouthful can mean strength for walking, warmth for surviving, pleasure in a hard day. Desire is practical before it becomes decorative. A quirky little detail sits quietly in the history of honey. In some places, people followed honey-guide birds, creatures known for leading humans toward beehives. The bird benefits from leftover wax and larvae, while humans get honey. It is not exactly a formal business contract, because birds remain terrible at paperwork, but it shows how deeply sweetness can pull different species into strange cooperation. The search for sweet food is not only human cleverness, it is ecology, habit, risk, and reward. You begin to sense that sugar, when it finally enters the story as a crystallized substance, will not arrive in an empty world. It will enter a world already trained to value sweetness. People already know the pleasure. They already connect sweetness with medicine, celebration, trade, and sacredness. What changes is not the craving, but the scale. For now, sweetness is local and limited. It belongs to flowers, orchards, forests, and careful hands. Night settles more fully. The fire lowers to red. Someone places dried fruit near the embers to soften. Honey is sealed away in a small container, protected from ants and eager fingers. The smell of smoke folds into the smell of earth. Your eyelids grow heavier. In this older world, sweetness is not everyday background noise. It is a small brightness against uncertainty, a taste that makes people pause. And in that pause, you can hear the beginning of a much larger history, soft as bees inside a hollow tree. You stand now where the air is thick, green, and breathing. Tall grasses rise above your shoulder, but these are not the ordinary grasses that whisper politely along a roadside. These stalks are heavy, jointed, and packed with juice. Their leaves rasp softly against one another whenever the warm wind moves through them. The ground is damp beneath your feet. The smell is lush and mineral, a mixture of wet soil, cut stems, and river mist. Somewhere nearby, insects pulse in waves of sound, as if the whole field is asleep and dreaming out loud. This is sugar cane, though not yet the tidy crop of neat plantation rows and global commerce. Its deep origins are usually traced to New Guinea and nearby regions, where people domesticated forms of cane long ago. You can imagine early growers learning its habits slowly, season by season. Cane likes heat, it likes moisture. It stores sweetness inside its stalk like a private joke. A person cuts it, peels away the hard outer skin, and chews the fibrous centre. Suddenly the mouth fills with juice. It is grassy, fresh, startlingly sweet. Not like honey and not like fruit. It is sweetness you can bite. You take a length of cane in both hands. The outside is firm and cool. A knife scrapes along it with a dry, clicking sound. When the pale interior appears, You press it between your teeth. The fibres resist at first, then split. Juice runs over your tongue. It tastes green, bright, and alive. You chew and chew, then spit out the pulp. Very elegant. Truly. Civilization begins with someone standing in a field, gnawing on grass and deciding this is worth improving. From Southeast Asia and the Pacific world, sugarcane gradually travels westward through human movement, trade, and cultivation. By the time it reaches the Indian subcontinent, something remarkable begins to happen. People do not merely chew the cane, they learn to crush it, collect the juice, boil it, concentrate it, and eventually crystallize it. This is one of the great turning points in food history. Sweetness becomes less temporary. It can be stored, it can be carried, it can be weighed, taxed, gifted, and sold. In ancient India, sugar appears in texts and practices connected to food, medicine, and trade. Sanskrit words associated with sugar and sugarcane helped shape later names for the substance in other languages. The word that eventually becomes sugar has roots connected to ancient Indian terms for gravelly or crystallized sweetness. That is a mainstream historical fact with a lovely texture to it, because the word itself seems to remember the crystals. Language keeps the crunch. You walk toward a simple pressing area. Cane stalks lie in bundles, their cut ends pale and wet. Workers feed them through a press, perhaps operated by hand or animal power in later forms. The machine groans, fibres crack, juice spills into a vessel, cloudy and greenish. It smells fresh at first, then warmer and heavier when poured into a pan over fire. Smoke curls upward, heat touches your face, the liquid trembles, darkens, thickens. Foam gathers at the surface and is skimmed away. The work is careful, patient, and a little sticky. Boil too little, and the juice remains syrup. Boil badly, and it burns. Control the heat. Stir, strain. Wait, and something new appears. Crystals form. They are not perfectly white. They may be brown, golden, uneven, and fragrant, holding traces of molasses. But they are solid sweetness, and that changes everything. Historians still debate the exact timing and pathways by which crystallized sugar developed in India, because early references can be difficult to interpret. Some texts mention sweet cane, some mention syrups, and some seem to describe crystallized products. Archaeology, language, and written records do not always sit neatly in one tidy bowl. History, like syrup, can be annoyingly resistant to clean edges. You feel the atmosphere of an early sugar workshop. It is warm, smoky, and humid. The floor may be packed earth. Your fingers become tacky from touching the cooled syrup. The smell of boiling cane clings to hair and cloth. Outside, green stalks rustle. Inside, people watch liquid become something almost magical. Not magic in the supernatural sense, perhaps, but close enough for a tired worker at the end of a long day. Sugar also enters medical traditions. In South Asian healing systems, sweet substances could be used in mixtures, tonics, and preparations. Sugar was not just a treat. It could carry herbs, soothe bitterness, preserve ingredients, and make medicine easier to take. This is one of sugar's quieter powers. It does not always announce itself as luxury. Sometimes it slips in as help, as balance, as a spoonful that persuades the body to accept what the healer recommends. Very sneaky, very effective. A quirky tidbit rests in the very shape of early sugar. In many places, sugar was formed into lumps, cakes, loaves, or rough crystalline masses rather than loose granules. You did not casually sprinkle it from a paper packet. You broke it, scraped it, dissolved it, or guarded it. A sweetener could arrive as something closer to a small stone than a powder. Imagine offering a guest a hard lump of sugar and a tool to chip it. Hospitality, but with mild carpentry. As cane cultivation expands, it carries knowledge with it. Farmers learn planting methods using cuttings rather than seeds. Boiling specialists refine their craft. Traders carry sweet products along roads and waterways. Rulers notice value. Religious communities, physicians, cooks, and merchants all find uses for this strange solid sweetness. The field, the furnace, and the market begin to connect. You pause near the edge of the cane. Evening lowers itself gently over the humid fields. The leaves turn dark against a violet sky. Smoke from the boiling place floats low and fragrant. Your hands still feel faintly sticky. In your mouth, the memory of cane juice lingers, grassy and bright. What began as a plant chewed for pleasure has become a craft, a commodity, and a promise. Sweetness is no longer only discovered in ripeness or gathered from bees. It is being manufactured by human patience, fire, and attention, one bubbling pan at a time. You enter a garden where water is the real architect. Channels run between beds of herbs and fruit trees, carrying a soft silver sound through the heat. The air is dry above you, but near the irrigation ditches it smells of damp clay, mint, and sun-warmed leaves. Date palms lift their crowns into a pale sky. Roses lean over pathways. Somewhere a fountain repeats the same patient syllable, over and over, as if teaching the afternoon how to breathe. In the Persian world, sugar becomes more than a crop. It becomes part of a refined culture of gardens, medicine, cooking, and courtly taste. Cane does not belong naturally to every landscape, of course. It is demanding, dramatic, and frankly not low maintenance. It needs warmth, water, labour, and skill. Yet in regions where irrigation is carefully managed, people coax it into growth. The result is a sweetness that feels cultivated in every sense of the word. You walk along a narrow watercourse, feeling the baked path under your sandals. The garden is not wild. It is arranged, divided, measured, and tended. Persian garden design often valued order, shade, flowing water, and the pleasure of enclosed green space and dry surroundings. To stand here is to understand how luxury can be practical. Shade cools the body. Water feeds plants. Fragrance lifts the spirit. Sugar, in such a setting, fits naturally as another controlled delight. Drawn from the earth through planning and patience, sugarcane cultivation spread into parts of the Sasanian Persian Empire, and later Persian knowledge became important in the wider transmission of sugar agriculture and processing. The mainstream fact is simple but important. Persia helped carry sugar from South Asia toward the Middle East and Mediterranean worlds. It served as a bridge of technique, appetite, and terminology. In this bridge, sugar was not just moved, it was interpreted. You enter a working space near the cultivated fields. Cane is stacked in cut bundles. The stalks look dusty at the joints, green and gold under the sun. A press creaks. A donkey shifts its weight. Men speak softly while juice flows into a container. The smell changes as the cane is crushed. First it is green and sharp. Then, near the boiling area, it becomes warm and caramel-like, mixed with smoke and ash. The touch of the air changes too. A dry garden breeze becomes a damp breath from the pans. In Persian medical thought, influenced by older traditions and later woven into Islamic medicine, sugar could appear as an ingredient in syrups and remedies. Physicians valued substances according to qualities such as heat, coldness, moisture, and dryness. Depending on the medical framework being used, sugar could sweeten bitter preparations, preserve medicinal compounds, and create syrups that were easier to swallow. There is comfort in that. Even in a learned medical system, the patient still has a tongue, and the tongue still has opinions. You hold a small cup of syrup. It catches the light in amber folds. It smells faintly of herbs. The surface clings to the cup when tilted. You take a careful sip. Sweetness arrives first, then bitterness underneath, then a cooling trace of some plant you cannot quite name. It is medicine pretending to be pleasant, or pleasure pretending to be respectable. Sugar is already learning one of its oldest tricks. The Persian word shakar helped influence later words for sugar in several languages. You can hear the journey inside the sound, from Sanskrit roots into Persian and then onward through Arabic, Greek, Latin, and European tongues. A crystal becomes a word becomes evidence of travel. It is rather impressive for something that dissolves so easily. There is also a quirky detail in the way sugar's early reputation floated between food, medicine, and luxury. In elite settings, sugar could be treated almost like a spice. It was not yet the everyday background sweetness that disappears into cakes and tea. It was noticed. It could decorate food, balance sauces, or signal sophistication. A cook who had sugar possessed not only an ingredient but a small announcement someone here has access to expensive things. Subtle? Not really. But courts have rarely been famous for subtlety. Historians still argue whether some early Persian sugar production was widespread enough to shape ordinary diets, or whether it remained concentrated in elite, medical, and commercial circles. The evidence suggests importance, but not modern abundance. That distinction matters. A food can be culturally powerful long before it is common. A rare ingredient can change imagination before it changes breakfast. You pass from the garden into a shaded room where shelves hold jars, cloth bundles, dried herbs, and small containers of precious substances. The room smells of fennel, vinegar, rosewater, smoke, and something sweet tucked away in a sealed vessel. A scholar or physician may sit nearby, writing carefully, copying knowledge received from earlier authorities and adding observations of his own. Outside, the garden murmurs. Inside, sweetness is classified, measured, and given purpose. Rosewater deserves a soft pause here. Persian and neighbouring culinary cultures prize perfumed waters, fruits, nuts, and delicate balances of flavour. Sugar joined these tastes beautifully. Imagine a sweetened drink cooled with snow from mountains, or a syrup scented with rose. The cup touches your lips, cool and smooth. The fragrance rises before the taste arrives. For a moment, sweetness is not loud. It is elegant, almost sleepy, like moonlight learning to be edible. Yet none of this refinement removes the labour behind it. Cane must be planted. Water must be guided. Presses must be built. Fuel must be gathered. Juice must be boiled in heat that makes clothing cling to the skin. Luxury often enters history wearing perfume, but somewhere nearby, someone is sweating through the practical details. Sugar's story is always both fragrant and heavy. As evening gathers over the garden, the irrigation channels darken. The water still moves, softly touching stone. The leaves release a cooler smell. You can feel the day leaving the walls. In a bowl, a small amount of sugar rests like pale gravel, guarded against dampness and waste. It is medicine, flavour, status, and technology all at once. In this quiet Persian setting, sweetness learns how to become civilized, or at least how to look civilized while asking for a great deal of water, labour, and attention. You move into a world of courtyards, harbours, workshops, libraries, and sunlit roads where sugar begins to travel with new confidence. The air is warm and busy. You hear hooves on stone, water turning in channels, merchants calling from shaded stalls, and the steady wooden groan of machinery near fields of cane. The smell is layered dust, animals, lamp oil, citrus peel, wet reeds, and boiling syrup. It is not a quiet sweetness anymore. It is organised. It has accountants now. Naturally, once humans discover something delicious, someone eventually arrives with a ledger. Across the early Islamic world, sugar cultivation and processing spread widely. From lands once shaped by Persian and Byzantine systems, sugar moved through Iraq, Syria, Egypt, North Africa, Sicily, southern Spain, and other Mediterranean zones. This expansion relied on irrigation, agricultural knowledge, skilled labour, and networks of trade that connected cities, ports, and rural estates, sugar was becoming part of a much larger system of movement, one where plants, techniques, books, physicians, cooks, and merchants all crossed paths. You walk beside an irrigation canal in a hot, cultivated plain. The water is shallow and quick, flashing under the sun. Mud presses coolly at the edge of your sandals. Cane fields stand nearby, their leaves whispering sharply in the breeze. In many regions, farmers and engineers improved or maintained water systems that made thirsty crops possible. Sugarcane, being the demanding guest at the agricultural table, needs generous moisture. It cannot simply be tossed into dry ground and wish the best. It wants care, scheduling, and a great deal of attention. Like a caught poet with roots, the field is only the beginning. You enter a mill where cane stalks are brought in bundles. The workers' hands are rough from cutting. The stalks scrape together with a hollow, papery sound. A press turns, powered by animals or human labour depending on place and period. Juice runs out pale and cloudy. It is collected quickly, because cane juice spoils if neglected. That simple fact shapes the whole rhythm of production. Cut, crush, boil, clarify, concentrate. Sugar does not reward laziness. It is sweet. Yes, but it is also a tiny tyrant. In the boiling house, the air is thick enough to taste. Steam beads on your face. Smoke stings your eyes. The copper or iron pans tremble over the heat, and the juice slowly darkens. Workers skim froth, judge texture, shift liquid from one stage to another. A good sugar maker must understand timing by sight, smell, and touch. The syrup changes from watery green to golden brown, then toward heavy sweetness. Crystals appear only when heat, concentration, and cooling cooperate. The process feels part craft, part chemistry, part argument with a very sticky substance. A mainstream historical fact sits at the centre of this moment during the medieval Islamic period. Sugar became more widely cultivated around the Mediterranean and Middle Eastern worlds than it had been in earlier Western regions. It appeared in cookery, pharmacology, trade, agriculture, and elite consumption. Arabic texts preserved and developed knowledge about syrups, confections, and medicinal preparations. Sugar was valued not only as food, but as a substance with uses in healing, hospitality, and refinement. You sit for a moment in a market street. The shade of woven awnings falls across trays of dried fruit, nuts, spices, and small sweets. The atmosphere is gently crowded. You hear bargaining, laughter, the clink of metal cups, and the soft slap of dough being worked nearby. A vendor offers a sweetened preparation scented with rose, sesame, almond, or citrus. You take a small piece. It is dense, fragrant, and clings slightly to your teeth. Your jaw considers filing a complaint, but your tongue is very supportive. Sugar also found a home in pharmacies. Medieval Islamic medicine made extensive use of syrups, electuaries, and compound preparations. Sugar helped preserve ingredients and made bitter medicines more agreeable. The patient, lying under a thin cloth in a warm room smelling of herbs and vinegar, may have received a sweetened remedy from a careful physician. The sugar did not make illness charming. Of course, nothing says relaxation like humoral imbalance, but it could make treatment smoother, and it gave medicine a taste of gentleness. A quirky tidbit comes from the world of medieval confections and display. Sugar could be shaped into decorative forms, sometimes used for impressive courtly presentation. In later medieval and early modern settings, this passion for sculpted sugar would become almost theatrical. But its roots lie in a long tradition of treating sweetness as something that could please the eye as well as the mouth. Imagine being served a tiny edible structure made of sugar, beautiful, fragile, and doomed. Truly the most honest form of architecture. Historians still dispute how far sugar reached beyond courts, wealthy households, and medical uses in many Islamic cities. Some evidence points to active production and trade, yet ordinary daily consumption varied greatly by region, class, and century. It is tempting to picture everyone happily spooning sugar into everything, but history enjoys disappointing simple pictures. For many people, sweetness still came from fruit, dates, grape syrup, honey, or local substitutes. Sugar was growing more familiar, but familiarity is not the same as abundance. You follow sugar toward the sea, at a port, sacks, jars, and bundles wait among ceramics, textiles, spices, and metalwork. Ships creak against ropes, salt air mixes with the smell of tar, fish, and hot dust. Sugar can move now as crystals, loaves, syrup, or refined products. It joins the busy conversation of commerce. Every transfer adds cost, value, risk, and story. A crop rooted in mud becomes a travelling luxury, crossing water under the care of sailors who probably care less about poetic sweetness than about not sinking. In Sicily and Al-Andalus, sugar cultivation became part of rich agricultural landscapes shaped by irrigation and experimentation. These regions helped introduce many crops, techniques, and tastes into Mediterranean life. Gardens grew citrus, pomegranates, herbs, and cane where conditions allowed. The mix of scholarship and practical farming mattered. Agricultural manuals described soils, water, grafting, seasons, and plant care. A field was not merely a field. It was a text written in roots, weather, and labour. Night settles over the city, lamps glow in niches. A fountain cools the courtyard with its repeating murmur. Somewhere nearby, a cook dissolves sugar into a syrup until the room smells floral and warm. Somewhere else, a worker scrubs sticky pans with tired hands. Sugar has become a traveller through language, religion, science, and appetite. It moves in caravans and ships, in recipes and remedies, in elite ceremonies and practical workshops. You feel the sweetness expanding, not loudly, but steadily, like water finding every channel prepared for it. You step into medieval Europe at the edge of a feast, where sweetness arrives wearing the expression of someone who knows perfectly well it is expensive. The hall is smoky, noisy, and dim. Rushes soften the floor beneath your shoes. Candles tremble in iron holders. Dogs nose hopefully near benches, because history may change. But dogs near dinner remain confident little opportunists. The air smells of roasted meat, spilled ale, wood smoke, damp wool, and spices carried from very far away. Sugar is present, but not ordinary. It does not sit in a bowl waiting for careless fingers. It appears in small amounts, guarded by cooks, physicians, merchants, and household officers. In much of medieval Europe, especially before wider Atlantic production, sugar is a luxury imported through Mediterranean trade. It reaches ports such as Venice, Genoa, and other commercial centres, then moves inland to wealthy homes, monasteries, courts, and apothecaries. For many people, honey remains the familiar sweetener. Sugar belongs to the world of privilege. You pass a table where a noble household is preparing for guests. Cloth is laid, silver glints. Trenchers of bread wait to receive meats and sauces. A cook works near the fire, sweating in the heat, stirring a sauce that blends sweet and savoury flavours. Medieval elite cooking often uses spices, vinegar, wine, fruit, and sugar together in combinations that may surprise a modern tongue. Sweetness is not trapped in dessert. It wanders freely through meat dishes, sauces, medicines, and decorative subtleties, as if nobody has yet informed it about menu categories. You lean closer as the cook sprinkles sugar with care. The grains are not pure white snow, they may be off-white, beige, or slightly brown, depending on processing. The smell from the pan rises rich and sharp, with vinegar cutting through sweetness. A spoon taps the side of the vessel. The sauce thickens. You taste a little on your tongue sour, sweet, spiced, warm. It is strange, but not unpleasant. Medieval taste enjoys balance, contrast, and display. It is not trying to become your supermarket cupcake. It has its own ambitions, thank you very much. A mainstream historical fact is clear in medieval Europe. Sugar was often sold by apothecaries as well as merchants, and it was considered useful in medicine. Physicians working within learned medical traditions used sugar in syrups, powders, and electuaries. It could preserve ingredients, carry medicinal flavours, and soften bitterness. In a small apothecary shop, you smell dried lavender, sage, vinegar, wax, and old wood. Jars line the shelves. The sugar is weighed carefully, more like a valuable drug than a casual pantry item. You watch the apothecary take out a small amount. The scale is delicate. The weights are precise. A patient waits nearby, wrapped in a cloak, looking tired and probably suspicious of whatever mixture is coming. Sugar enters the remedy as comfort and persuasion. Bitter herbs are more acceptable when softened by sweetness. It is a small mercy in a world with very bold medical ideas and not always very gentle treatments. In noble households, sugar also becomes a tool of spectacle. One famous medieval and early modern luxury is the subtlety, an elaborate decorative dish or edible display sometimes made with sugar, almond paste, pastry, or other materials. These creations could represent castles, animals, saints, ships, or symbolic scenes. A feast might include an object meant to be admired before being eaten. There is something wonderfully odd about spending huge effort on a sugar sculpture, presenting it with ceremony, and then letting guests destroy it with spoons. Wealth has always had a flair for temporary drama. A quirky tidbit rests in the name white gold, often used to describe sugar's preciousness in later discussions of its history. Medieval people did not all use that exact phrase in the same way, but the idea fits the experience of rarity. Sugar could be locked away with spices. It might be listed in household accounts with care. A small quantity could signal access to distant trade. The sweetest thing in the room might also be the most political, which is a little unfair to the candied fruit just trying to exist. Historians still argue over how quickly sugar moved from medicinal luxury into culinary fashion across different parts of Europe. The pattern was uneven. Italy, Iberia, France, England, and northern regions did not experience sugar in exactly the same way or at the same pace. Trade routes, court habits, medical texts, religious fasting practices, and local wealth all mattered. The evidence comes from recipes, account books, customs records, medical writings, and archaeology. And these sources do not always sing in perfect harmony. You walk from the smoky hall into a quieter kitchen passage. The stone wall is cool under your fingertips. Somewhere behind you, laughter rises. Somewhere ahead, a servant carries a covered dish. The building breathes heat from fires and chill from winter air. Sugar travels through this house in tiny, careful movements. It is scraped from a loaf, mixed into almond milk, dusted over wafers, dissolved into syrup, or saved for a guest whose importance has been silently calculated. Almond milk appears often in medieval European cooking, especially during fasting periods when animal products were restricted. Sugar can sweeten it, turning a religious rule into something a little more bearable. You can picture a monk receiving a modest sweetened preparation during a fast day and deciding that discipline is much easier when almonds and sugar are doing some of the moral heavy lifting. The room smells of ground nuts and warm water. Cloth strains the liquid. A little sugar smooths the taste. At a royal or aristocratic table, sugar also carries social meaning. To serve it is to show connection to wider trade. It hints at ships crossing seas, merchants negotiating prices, growers and refiners working far away, and household wealth gathered into one glittering pinch. Guests notice. They are meant to notice. In a society built on rank, display is not a side effect, it is part of the meal. Yet outside such circles, many lives remain only lightly touched by sugar. In cottages and village homes, sweetness still comes mainly from honey, fruit, ale, or syrups made from local produce. A peasant household may hear of sugar, perhaps see it rarely, perhaps taste it on an unusual occasion, but it is not yet daily comfort. The field labourer, the washerwoman, the shepherd, the child warming hands near a hearth. These people do not live in a sugared world. Not yet. Night deepens around the manor, the last dishes are cleared, the rushes hold the scent of smoke and spilled drink. In a locked chest or storeroom, the remaining sugar waits in silence, protected from damp, theft, and mice with refined taste. You feel how powerful rarity can be. Sugar is not merely sweet. It is medicine, theatre, trade, status, and temptation gathered into a small crystalline form. Europe has tasted it now, and the taste lingers. You reach an island in the Atlantic, where the ocean keeps breathing against black rock and steep green slopes. The air tastes of salt. Wind presses your clothes against your skin, then releases them. Above the shore, hills climb into mist, and terraces hold plants in careful lines. You hear gulls crying over the harbour, axes biting into wood farther inland, and water running through channels cut by human hands. The smell is sharp and alive seaweed, wet stone, smoke, cane leaves, and earth newly opened. Here, on islands such as Madeira, the Canaries and São Tomé, sugar begins to change scale. These places become testing grounds for plantation systems that will later expand with terrifying force across the Atlantic. The island setting matters. Land can be claimed, surveyed, reorganized, and planted. Water can be diverted. Forests can be cut. Labour can be controlled. Ships can arrive, load, and leave. The island becomes not just a place, but a machine with cliffs, harbours, and a very demanding crop at its centre. You walk up from the harbour along a path worn by carts and bare feet. Madeira, colonised by the Portuguese in the 15th century, became especially important in early Atlantic sugar production. Its climate and terrain allowed cane cultivation where irrigation could be managed. Water channels called levadas carried moisture from wetter highlands into cultivated zones. These channels whispered through the landscape, slipping along slopes and stone edges. They made sugar possible in places where rain alone was not enough. The touch of the island is rough. Volcanic soil crumbles underfoot. The sun warms your neck, but mist clings to the higher ground. Cane fields stand in terraces, their leaves slicing softly against one another. When wind moves through them, the sound is almost like paper being shuffled by invisible hands. Workers cut the stalks close to the ground. The cane falls with a heavy sigh. Bundles are tied, lifted and dragged toward mills before the sweetness inside can sour. This is where sugar becomes a lesson in speed. Cane juice begins to deteriorate soon after cutting, so field and mill must work together. A plantation is not simply a field with rich owners lounging somewhere nearby. Although rich owners are very good at appearing when money's counted, it is an organised system of land, water, labour, animals, fuel, presses, pans, storehouses, and shipping. Everything has to move in sequence. Cut the cane, crush the cane, boil the juice, cure the sugar, pack it for market. In the mill, the sound changes. You hear wooden gears, animal hooves, shouted instructions, and the cracking of cane under pressure. The air is damp and sweet, but not delicately sweet. It is thick, vegetal, almost fermented at the edges. Juice runs into containers, cloudy and greenish. It is rushed toward the boiling house, where heat swallows the room. Fires must be fed constantly. Steam touches your face. Smoke crawls into your throat. Sugar may look calm in a bowl, but its making is loud, hot, and impatient. A mainstream historical fact sits heavily here. The Atlantic islands helped develop the plantation model that would later be transferred to the Caribbean and the Americas. Madeira became a major sugar producer in the 15th and early 16th centuries, supplying European markets. The Canaries also played an important role under Iberian expansion. São Tomé, farther south in the Gulf of Guinea, became deeply tied to sugar production and enslaved African labour. These islands were not small footnotes. They were rehearsals with real consequences. You pause near a boiling house doorway. Inside, syrup moves from pan to pan as workers concentrate it. The heat is astonishing. Sweat runs down backs. Hands are sticky, burned, or calloused. The smell is sweet, smoky, and slightly bitter. Clarifying agents may be used to help remove impurities. The thickened liquid is poured into moulds or left to crystallize and drain. Molasses darkens the floor if spilled. Flies approve of the whole arrangement, because flies have never respected human labour. A quirky tidbit belongs to the sugar loaf. In this era, and for centuries later, refined sugar often took the form of hard cones or loaves. These were made by pouring concentrated sugar into conical moulds and allowing molasses to drain away. The result could be wrapped, shipped, stored, and later cut with special tools. A household did not shake sugar from a packet. It attacked a cone. Imagine needing equipment for tea. Charming, but slightly aggressive. Historians still debate how directly each island shaped later American plantation systems, because the transfer was not a single simple copy. Techniques, investors, labour practices, crops, mills, and legal ideas moved unevenly through Portuguese, Spanish, Genoese, Flemish, and other commercial networks. Some scholars emphasise Madeira as the key model. Others point to the Canaries or São Tomé for particular patterns of coerced labour and estate organisation. The broad pattern is clear, but the exact recipe is still argued over, which feels appropriate for sugar. The social world around island sugar is tense and layered. There are landowners, merchants, skilled technicians, enslaved workers, wage labourers, local settlers, sailors, and officials. Some people profit enormously, others endure exhaustion, confinement, and violence. The plantation is already revealing the moral contradiction that will haunt sugar for centuries. It produces pleasure for distant consumers by concentrating hardship close to the cane. You look toward the harbour, where barrels, crates, and sacks wait for ships. The sea wind brings tar, salt, fish, and wet rope. Merchants calculate cargo. Sailors mend lines. Sugar leaves the island as a commodity, but it carries with it invisible things: cut forests, diverted water, forced labour, skilled craft, debt, ambition, and hunger for profit. By the time it reaches a European city, it may seem clean and elegant. The island has done the messy work of hiding the mess. The land itself changes. Forests are cleared for cane and fuel. Water is directed into channels. Hillsides are terraced. Mills require timber, metal, animals, and stone. The ecology is pressed into service, just as people are. Sugar is not only a taste, it is a landscape maker. It rearranges slopes, drains streams, and teaches harbours to expect certain ships. As dusk settles, the cane fields darken to blue-green. The sea glimmers below like hammered metal. Smoke rises from boiling houses, and the scent of cooked syrup hangs in the cooling air. You feel the island's beauty and its unease together. Ocean, mist, terraces, sweetness, fatigue. On these Atlantic islands, sugar learns how to become an industry. The world grows sweeter in distant mouths, while here the fields listen to the mills turning late into the night. You board a wooden ship with cane cuttings wrapped and guarded like a quiet gamble. The deck rocks under your feet, salt dries on your lips, ropes creak, gulls wheel above the harbour, and sailors move with that careful confidence people develop when the floor beneath them is never truly still. The air smells of pitch, damp canvas, old wood, sweat, and the faint green scent of plants trying not to die on a sea voyage. It is not the most graceful nursery, really. A ship is many things. But a floating garden centre is not its natural calling. In the late 15th century, European voyages across the Atlantic carried more than people, weapons, animals, and ambition. They carried plants. Sugarcane was among them. Christopher Columbus brought cane cuttings to the Caribbean on his second voyage in 1493, taking them to Hispaniola. That fact is one of the turning hinges of world history. A crop already shaped by Asian, Persian, Islamic, Mediterranean, and Atlantic island knowledge now enters American soil under European colonial power. You stand near the rail as the ship leaves familiar waters. The horizon opens into blue distance. Days fold into one another. The cane cuttings must be kept alive, protected from salt spray and rot. They are pieces of stem, not seeds, because sugarcane is commonly propagated from cuttings. Each joint carries the possibility of a new plant. A little section of cane can become a field. If climate, water, labour and violence arrange themselves around it. That is the unsettling thing about crops in history. They can look harmless while carrying whole systems inside them. The voyage is uncomfortable. The wood groans at night. Barrels shift in the hold. Rats conduct their private business with irritating confidence. The smell below deck grows thick and sour. Above, stars sharpen in the dark sky. You hear waves slap the hull in steady patterns, then suddenly strike hard when weather changes. The cane cuttings are only one cargo among many, but they hold a future no one fully understands. People may dream of profit. They do not yet see the full machinery of empire that will rise from fields of sweetness. When the Caribbean comes into view, the colour changes first. Water brightens into impossible blues and greens. Warm air carries the smell of vegetation, salt, and wet heat. Hispaniola is not empty land, no matter what colonial fantasies would prefer. Indigenous Taino communities live there, with their own agriculture, trade, spiritual worlds, and political structures. European arrival brings catastrophe through violence, forced labour, disease, and dispossession. Sugarcane enters this wounded landscape as part of conquest. You step ashore and feel the warmth rise from the ground. The soil is rich in places. Rain comes generously in some regions. Sunlight presses down with force. Cane likes this climate. It grows tall and fast compared with cooler regions. Its leaves whisper in the wind. Its stalks swell with juice. To European colonizers, the Caribbean begins to appear as a place where tropical crops can produce extraordinary wealth. To the people forced into that production, the same fields become places of loss. At first, sugar in the Caribbean does not instantly explode into the vast plantation economy later associated with islands such as Barbados, Jamaica, and Saint-Domingue. Early Spanish colonization focuses heavily on gold, indigenous labor tribute, cattle, settlement, and imperial control. Sugar takes investment. It requires mills, boiling equipment, skilled knowledge, fuel, land, and workers. It is expensive before it becomes profitable. You can almost hear investors sighing, which is not quite sympathy, but it is a sound history makes often. Still, the cane grows. By the early 16th century, sugar mills begin operating on Hispaniola, and the crop becomes increasingly important in the Spanish Caribbean. Mills need power. Some use animals, some use water where terrain allows. Cane must be cut and crushed quickly. Boiling houses must be staffed. Wood must feed fires. The work is constant, hot, and hazardous. Sweetness, once again, is not made in gentle conditions. A mainstream historical fact belongs here: the Caribbean would become one of the most important sugar-producing regions in the world, but its rise depended on colonial land seizure and coerced labour systems. Indigenous labour was first exploited, and as indigenous populations were devastated, colonisers increasingly turned to enslaved Africans. This shift was not accidental. It was a deliberate response to labour demands, imperial profit, and racialised systems of domination that would harden over centuries. You walk near an early cane field at dusk. The plants are taller than you. Their leaves scratch lightly against your sleeves. The smell is green, wet, and faintly sweet where stalks have been cut. Frogs call from low ground. Mosquitoes gather with rude enthusiasm. Somewhere a mill wheel complains in slow rotation. In the distance, smoke lifts from boiling fires. The atmosphere feels fertile and uneasy, as if the land itself is being made to speak a new language under pressure. A quirky tidbit rests in the travelling companions of sugarcane. Europeans also brought cattle, pigs, horses, citrus, bananas already spread from earlier Afro-Eurasian routes, and many other plants and animals into Caribbean environments. Some flourished wildly. Pigs, in particular, adapted so successfully that they became a serious problem in many places. It is oddly fitting that while colonisers imagined orderly estates and obedient landscapes, the pigs were out there freelancing. Nature often refuses to read imperial instructions. Historians still debate the precise pace of sugar's early Caribbean expansion and the relative importance of different islands in its first decades. Records are uneven, and colonial reports often exaggerate success, hide failure, or treat human suffering as a footnote. Some mills flourished, others struggled. Some estates shifted crops or collapsed under debt. The sugar future was powerful, but not inevitable in every detail. It had to be built, financed, defended, and forced into being. In the colonial town, sugar begins appearing in paperwork grants, debts, mill licenses, shipments, inheritances, and disputes. A cane field is never just a cane field once law gets involved. It becomes property. It becomes collateral. It becomes a reason for officials to argue and merchants to hover. The crop reaches into courts, ports, and counting houses. It teaches colonisers to measure land by possible sweetness. You pause by the shore as night settles. The sea that carried cane cuttings westward now reflects moonlight in broken strips. The air is heavy with salt and flowers. Behind you, inland, cane grows under stars unfamiliar to European eyes but deeply known to the people whose world has been invaded. Sugar has taken root in the Caribbean, and with it, a new chapter of global history begins to harden. The plant is green and quiet. The system forming around it is anything but innocent. You walk into the cane fields under a sun that does not seem to blink. Heat gathers on your shoulders and presses through your clothes. The leaves of the cane are sharp along the edges, brushing skin with tiny cuts that sting when sweat reaches them. The air smells of wet vegetation, smoke from the boiling house, damp soil, and human exhaustion. Insects whine near your ears. Somewhere a bird calls from the trees, bright and careless, as if the world has not become a machine for sweetness. Here, sugar reveals its deepest cruelty. The plantation is not just a farm. It is a system built to extract as much labour, land, and profit as possible. In the Caribbean and parts of the Americas, European empires and colonial elites expand sugar production through the forced labour of enslaved Africans and their descendants. The crop becomes one of the central engines of the transatlantic slave trade. Ships carry people across the ocean in chains, and many are sold into lives of brutal work on sugar estates. You stand at the edge of a plantation at dawn. The fields are already awake. Enslaved workers move in groups, carrying tools. The sound of metal blades against cane begins in a steady rhythm. Cane cutting is harsh work. Stalks must be cut low, stripped, bundled, and moved quickly. The leaves slice, the sun burns, the ground can be muddy, uneven, or crawling with pests. The body bends and lifts, again and again. Sweetness for distant tables begins with pain in the back, hands, and lungs. The mainstream historical fact here is severe sugar plantations in the Caribbean, Brazil, and other parts of the Americas depended heavily on enslaved African labour, and the demand for sugar helped drive the expansion of Atlantic slavery. Sugar was among the most labour-intensive plantation crops. It required field workers, mill workers, boilers, carpenters, coopers, drivers, animal handlers, and domestic labourers. It demanded time with almost no mercy, because harvested cane had to be processed before the juice spoiled. You enter the mill yard, and the noise is constant. Oxen or horses circle slowly, turning crushing rollers. In some estates, water power or later wind power turns the machinery. Cane is fed into the rollers, and juice pours out. The crushed stalks, called baguettes, are sometimes dried and used as fuel. The smell is grassy and sour-sweet. The rollers are dangerous, and the work near them is frighteningly unforgiving. A moment of distraction can cost fingers, hands, or worse. Sugar has a beautiful sparkle in a bowl, but here its first music is grinding wood, groaning animals, and strained breath. The boiling house feels like entering the mouth of summer. Heat rolls from the furnaces. Pans of cane juice bubble and spit. Workers skim, ladle, transfer, and judge the syrup as it thickens. Smoke clouds the room. Molasses clings to surfaces. Skin feels sticky. Eyes water. The sugar boiler holds specialized knowledge, because one wrong moment can ruin a batch. Skill exists here under coercion. Intelligence exists under domination. Enslaved workers knew land, machinery, fire, timing, and survival. Plantation records often reduce them to numbers, but the estate could not function without their expertise. A quirky and grim tidbit sits in the plantation clock. On many sugar estates, the harvest and grinding season could become almost sleepless. Mills and boiling houses might run day and night when cane was ready. People worked in shifts under extreme pressure. Even time itself seemed owned by sugar. The crop did not merely occupy fields, it invaded darkness. Imagine a plant so demanding it persuades human beings to light fires through the night just to keep up. Very rude behaviour from a grass. Historians still argue over how mortality, birth rates and labour regimes differed across sugar colonies, because conditions varied by island, century, empire, disease environment, and plantation management. Yet scholars widely agree that many sugar zones were among the most lethal places for enslaved people in the Atlantic world. In some colonies, death rates were so high that plantation owners relied on continual importation of enslaved Africans rather than the natural growth of the enslaved population. The numbers are historical, but the lives inside them are intimate. You pass the quarters where enslaved people try to make life under impossible constraints. The atmosphere changes. There is the smell of cooking fires, worn cloth, earth floors, and small gardens if space is allowed or claimed. You hear low voices, a child coughing, someone singing softly, a pot lid shifting. Even within violent systems, people build families, rituals, languages, foodways, music, healing practices, and forms of resistance. They preserve fragments of African cultures and create new Afro-Atlantic worlds. The plantation tries to turn people into labour units. People keep becoming human anyway. Food matters deeply. Enslaved workers may cultivate provision grounds, fish, hunt, trade, or prepare meals from rations and whatever they can grow. Cassava, plantains, yams, maize, beans, salted fish, and peppers become part of survival in different regions. A small garden can be more than food. It can be autonomy measured in leaves. It can be memory planted in the ground. It can be a quiet refusal to let the estate define every mouthful. Resistance takes many forms. Some people slow work, break tools, steal food, preserve spiritual practices, escape temporarily, or flee permanently to form maroon communities in mountains, forests, and difficult terrain. Others revolt openly. Sugar plantations are places of discipline, but also places of fear for those who claim ownership, because every estate contains the possibility of rebellion. The cane field can hide movement. The night can carry messages. The same landscape organized for profit can shelter defiance. You feel the cane closing around the path. Leaves whisper overhead. The soil smells wet and hot. Your hand touches a cut stalk, and the exposed end is sticky. That small sweetness feels almost unbearable here. It is too easy, from a distant table, to forget the bodies behind the taste. Plantation sugar teaches one of history's hardest lessons: comfort can be built from someone else's suffering, then wrapped so neatly that consumers no longer see the cost. In the great houses, sugar profits become furniture, silver, imported porcelain, education, political influence, and city investments. In European ports, sugar helps build fortunes for refiners, merchants, insurers, ship owners, and bankers. The plantation is connected to counting houses, taverns, legislatures, and elegant drawing rooms. A spoonful of sugar in a fashionable drink carries the weight of fields, ships, auctions, and laws. Night falls, but the boiling house still glows. Firelight flickers through gaps in the walls. Frogs call from the wet ground, and smoke spreads low over the estate. Workers move like shadows through heat and fatigue. The smell of molasses hangs heavy in the dark. You understand now that sugar's rise cannot be told as a charming tale of taste alone. It is also a history of forced labour, stolen lives, and wealth made sweet at a distance. The crystal is small, but the shadow it casts is vast. You settle into a European morning where the hearth has already been lit, and the room smells of coal smoke, damp wool, toasted bread, and something newly fashionable steaming in a cup. Outside, cartwheels grind over wet stones. A church bell marks the hour. Inside, a spoon touches porcelain with a small bright clink. Sugar is changing its social costume. It is still valuable, still watched, still capable of impressing visitors, but it is no longer only a rare sparkle for feasts and physici jars. It is beginning to enter habit. You sit at a table in a growing town, where imported drinks are quietly rearranging daily life. Tea, coffee, and chocolate have arrived through expanding trade networks, colonial violence, maritime commerce, and curiosity with an expensive wardrobe. Each of these drinks can be bitter on the tongue. Sugar softens them. It turns strong, dark, unfamiliar flavours into something smoother, friendlier, and easier to repeat tomorrow morning. Human beings are very predictable in this way. Give them bitterness, then offer sweetness, and suddenly they have a routine. In 17th and 18th century Europe, sugar consumption rises dramatically, especially among urban populations with access to imported goods. In England, the Netherlands, France, and other regions, sugar becomes tied to hot drinks, preserves, baked goods, and confectionery. A mainstream historical fact is clear: as Atlantic plantation production expanded and refining improved, sugar moved from elite luxury toward wider household use. It did not become equally available to everyone at once, but its presence grew steadily in ordinary diets. You lift a cup of coffee. The surface is black and shining. Its smell is roasted, earthy, and slightly burnt, like a very serious conversation in liquid form. Without sugar, the taste may feel harsh to a new drinker. Add a small piece, stir slowly, and the bitterness rounds out. The spoon moves in circles. Steam touches your face. The cup warms your fingers. Suddenly the drink invites another sip. Sugar does not merely sweeten coffee. It teaches people to desire it. Nearby, tea is poured from a pot into delicate cups. The leaves come from Asia, carried through complex trade routes and imperial competition. At first, tea is a fashionable novelty among elites. Gradually, especially in Britain, it becomes a daily ritual across wider social groups. Sugar fits into the ceremony with astonishing ease. Bitter tannins meet sweetness. Milk may join the arrangement. The result is comforting, warm, and repeatable. A small table becomes a stage for empire, manners, gossip, and thirst. The room is modest but proud. A sugar bowl sits near the cups, perhaps filled with lumps broken from a loaf. Tongs may be used to lift the pieces. The bowl itself can become a sign of gentility. Even a household with limited means may wish to display sugar when guests arrive. Hospitality changes. To offer sweetened tea or coffee says that you are respectable, connected, and not entirely crushed by the price of imported goods. Very tasteful, and just a little competitive. A quirky tidbit belongs to the sugar nippers used to cut pieces from hard sugar loaves. These tools looked a bit like small metal pincers or pliers. Before loose granulated sugar became common, people needed to chip, snip, or crush sugar into usable bits. The sound of sugar being cut could be part of domestic life. Imagine preparing a peaceful cup of tea and first having to confront a cone of sweetness with hardware. Cozy, but with a hint of blacksmithing. Sugar also transforms preserving. Fruits that once belonged to a season can be captured in jams, marmalades, and candied peels. You stand in a kitchen where copper pans glow near the fire. Oranges, quinces, berries, and plums simmer with sugar until the air fills with bright tea, sticky fragrance. Steam fogs the window. A cook tests the set of the preserve on a cool plate. Sugar makes abundance last longer. It turns summer into jars. It gives winter a cupboard full of memory. Historians still debate how evenly rising sugar consumption spread across classes and regions during these centuries. Account books, probate inventories, customs records, advertisements, and cookbooks show growing use, but they do not describe every household equally. Some people consumed sugar daily. Others tasted it mainly on special occasions. Rural life, wages, port access, taxes, and local habits all shaped the pace. The sweet tooth of Europe was not one mouth. It was many mouths opening at different speeds. You step into a coffee house, and the atmosphere changes. The room is thick with tobacco smoke, wet coats, ink, argument, and roasted coffee. Men read newspapers, debate politics, trade rumours, discuss shipping, and pretend they are not mostly enjoying being heard. Cups move from table to table. Sugar sits nearby, quietly assisting the birth of public opinion. These coffee houses become centres of conversation, business, and news in several European cities. Sweetness helps keep people seated long enough to argue for hours, which is both civilization and a warning. Chocolate houses offer another kind of pleasure. Drinking chocolate, made from cacao brought through Atlantic and colonial networks, is often mixed with sugar and spices. It can be rich, oily, fragrant, and thick. You hold the cup and smell roasted cacao, cinnamon, vanilla, or ambergris in elite versions, because apparently some people looked at chocolate and asked how to make it even more dramatic. Sugar helps turn cacao's bitterness into luxury. For children, sugar begins to appear in treats more often, though childhood itself is understood differently across time and class. Comfits, candies, sweet biscuits, and sugared fruits enter shops and fairs. A child's hand closes around a small sweet, and the texture is hard, smooth, and precious. The mouth warms it slowly. Pleasure becomes portable. Desire learns to ask for more. Yet behind the cheerful table, the supply chain remains severe. Each sweetened cup depends on ships, refineries, plantation labour, credit, taxes, and retail networks. Consumers may know some of this, ignore some of it, or prefer the comfort of not thinking too deeply before breakfast. Sugar becomes ordinary partly because distance makes it easier to forget. Evening comes, and the table is cleared. The sugar bowl is covered. A few grains remain near the saucer, catching candlelight like tiny pieces of frost. The room smells of cooling tea, ashes, and bread crust. You feel the change that has taken place in daily life. Sweetness is no longer only an astonishment. It is becoming a rhythm, a pause, a polite offering, a craving that returns with the kettle. Europe's sweet tooth is settling in, softly but firmly, one cup at a time. You sit at a small table in Britain while rain taps lightly against the window, making the room feel tucked away from the world. The kettle whispers near the fire. A cup waits beside a saucer, thin enough at the rim to feel delicate against your lip. The air smells of coal smoke, polished wood, damp wool, black tea, and sugar. Outside, carts move through muddy streets. Inside, a spoon stirs in slow circles, and an empire gathers itself into a domestic ritual so gentle it almost hides the machinery behind it. Tea becomes one of Britain's defining habits, but it does not arrive alone. It travels with porcelain and silver, manners, shipping companies, customs duties, colonial politics, and sugar from Caribbean plantations. The cup in front of you is not a simple cup. It is a map pretending to be breakfast. Tea leaves from Asia meet sugar produced by enslaved labour in the Atlantic world. Then both arrive in a British household through trade networks guarded by ships, law, and a profit. Quite a lot of global history for something people insist on calling a nice cuppa. You lift the cup and smell the tea's dark warmth. Without sugar, it has a dry bitterness that grips the tongue. Add sweetness, and the edge softens. The drink becomes rounder, easier, more comforting. This pairing helps create a routine repeated across households, workplaces, inns, and parlours. By the 18th century, tea drinking has spread beyond aristocratic circles in Britain, and sugar's role grows with it. The combination changes appetite and time itself. Morning, afternoon, rest, conversation, and work breaks begin to find shape around the cup. The mainstream historical fact is important. British sugar consumption increased greatly during the 18th century, and much of that sugar came from colonies in the Caribbean, where enslaved Africans laboured on plantations. Islands such as Barbados, Jamaica, and later British-controlled territories became central to the sugar economy. Wealth from sugar flowed into merchants' houses, refineries, banks, ports, and politics. It also flowed into ordinary kitchens as prices gradually fell, making sweetness more accessible to many people in Britain. You step into a London refinery district. The atmosphere is very different from the tea table. The air smells of smoke, lime, molasses, wet brick, and burnt sweetness. Men move barrels and hogsheads through streets slick with mud. Inside the refinery, raw sugar is processed into whiter, more desirable forms. Heat, filtering, clarifying, draining, and moulding turn dark, sticky material into loaves that can be sold at different grades. The work is skilled and hot. The city takes the plantation's output and makes it respectable enough for polite company. Sugar refining becomes a major urban industry. Ports such as London, Bristol, Liverpool, Glasgow, Nantes, Bordeaux, Amsterdam, and others benefit from Atlantic trade in different ways. In Britain, sugar is tied not only to consumption, but to finance, insurance, shipbuilding, and political influence. A barrel of sugar is never just a barrel. It is credit, risk, labour, insurance paperwork, warehouse rent, dock fees, and someone's very serious hat in a counting house. You walk through a merchant's office where the smell of ink mixes with damp paper and tobacco. Ledgers record shipments, prices, losses, and profits. Ships are expected from Jamaica or Barbados. Letters discuss crop yields, storms, enslaved labourers, debts, and market demand with chilling business calm. The language of commerce smooths over suffering. Numbers march neatly down a page while, across the ocean, cane fields cut bodies and lives into exhaustion. Sugar becomes one of the great examples of how polite paperwork can sit on top of violence. At the tea table, women often play a central social role. They pour, serve, manage household manners, and create spaces for conversation. Tea drinking becomes associated with domestic respectability, sociability, and feminine accomplishment, though men drink it too, of course, usually while pretending their habits are more rational. The sugar bowl may be locked in a tea caddy or carefully watched by the mistress of the house. To control tea and sugar is to control hospitality, expense, and social presentation. A quirky tidbit belongs to the locked tea caddy. Because tea and sugar were valuable, households sometimes kept them in lockable boxes. The key might be carried by the woman managing the household. Imagine needing security measures for leaves and crystals. Sounds charming until you remember the cost. A guest receives sweetened tea, but behind that graces careful accounting. Every lump matters. The ritual spreads through class lines in uneven ways. Wealthier households serve refined sugar elegantly. Working families may use cheaper grades, smaller amounts, or sweetened tea as an important source of quick energy. For labourers, sweet tea can become more than comfort. It is warmth, calories, and a break in a long day. The drink is affordable enough to become common, yet still connected to global systems far beyond the kitchen. A tired worker holding a mug may be participating in empire without ever seeing a ship. Historians still debate how much sugar and tea changed working-class nutrition in Britain during the 18th and 19th centuries. Some emphasise cheap calories and stimulants that supported long hours of labour. Others warn against overstating the benefits, since sweet tea could not replace nourishing food and sometimes masked poverty rather than solving it. The evidence varies by region, wage level, household size, and time period. The cup is comforting, but it is not innocent, and it is certainly not a balanced meal, no matter how bravely the biscuit tries. You move to a dockside warehouse. The space is cool, dark, and heavy with smell. Molasses leaks faintly from casks. Rope fibres scratch your hand. Rats rustle somewhere in the gloom, clearly pursuing their own economic interests. Outside, cranes creak and men shout as cargo moves from ship to shore. Sugar arrives in bulk, but once divided and refined, it enters thousands of intimate moments. Tea with a neighbour, a child's treat, jam on bread, medicine for a cough, cake for a holiday. Empire also shapes taste through taxation and law. Duties on tea and sugar become matters of state revenue, smuggling, protest, and political debate. When governments tax everyday pleasures, people notice. Smugglers notice too, with enthusiasm. The line between legal commerce and illegal trade becomes porous along coasts and in villages. Tea and sugar may seem mild, but they can stir arguments about rights, prices, corruption, and power. Sweetness has a surprising talent for becoming political. The rain softens outside as evening settles. The cup grows cool on the saucer. A few grains of sugar cling near the rim of the bowl. Small and pale in candlelight, you feel the strange intimacy of this history. A household ritual, almost sleepy in its gentleness, is tied to plantations, ships, refineries, laws, debts, and resistance. Sugar and tea together help make empire feel ordinary, not by shouting from a throne, but by dissolving quietly into hot water, day after day. You enter the hills where the cane fields no longer look obedient. Mist rests in the folds of the mountains, and the air smells of wet leaves, wood smoke, and earth loosened by rain. Below, plantations spread across the lowlands in strict rows. But up here the paths twist, vanish, and return without asking permission. Bamboo knocks softly in the wind. Birds call from the trees. The ground is slick under your feet. Every sound feels watchful. Resistance grows wherever sugar tries to make people into property. On plantations across the Caribbean and the Americas, enslaved people resist in ways both quiet and open. Some slow the pace of work, some break tools, hide food, protect family ties, keep spiritual practices alive, or pass messages in songs and stories. Others escape into forests, swamps, hills, and mountains, forming maroon communities that survive beyond direct plantation control. Sugar estates may have ledges and fences, but forests have their own ideas. You move through a maroon settlement hidden among trees. Smoke rises thinly from cooking fires. Children carry water. Someone sharpens a blade against stone. A dog lifts its head, listening. The smell of roasting roots and green plantains drifts through the air. The people here are not living in an easy refuge. They must farm, hunt, defend, negotiate, heal, and remember. Freedom in these landscapes requires constant attention. Still, each hut, each garden patch, each trail through the brush declares something powerful the plantation does not own every horizon. A mainstream historical fact stands firm here. Maroon communities existed in many plantation societies, including Jamaica, Suriname, Brazil, Cuba, and Saint Domingue. Some became strong enough to force colonial governments into treaties. In Jamaica, for example, Maroon groups fought British forces and secured agreements in the 18th century. These communities were not all alike. Some were small and temporary. Others lasted for generations. Their existence terrified plantation owners because they proved escape was possible. You listen to the sound of drums somewhere deeper in the trees. The rhythm is low and steady, almost blending with the rain-tapping leaves. Music, religion, language, and memory carry forms of resistance that records often misunderstand or dismiss. Enslaved Africans and their descendants drew from many cultural traditions and created new ones in the Americas. Songs could encode sorrow, courage, satire, or warning. Dance could hold memory in the body. A shared meal could become a small republic of breath and salt. On the plantation, resistance can be quieter but no less meaningful. A worker may hide a tool. A cook may take extra food. A field hand may pretend not to understand an order that is perfectly clear. Small acts matter when power watches constantly. Of course, plantation managers called this laziness or disorder, because oppressors do enjoy giving rude names to courage. But these acts could protect energy, help families, damage profits, and keep alive the knowledge that obedience was never complete. Historians still argue over how to interpret everyday resistance, especially when the sources come mostly from plantation owners, courts, and colonial officials. A broken tool might be sabotage, accident, or desperate exhaustion. A missing hour might be defiance, illness, or all of these at once. Scholars must read against the grain, looking for human intention inside records written by people who often refuse to see enslaved people as full persons. The silence in the archive is not emptiness. It is a wall that must be listened through. You step into Saint Domingue in the late 18th century, where sugar wealth reaches extraordinary heights. This French colony, on the western part of Hispaniola, becomes one of the richest plantation societies in the Atlantic world, producing sugar, coffee, indigo, and other goods through the labour of hundreds of thousands of enslaved people. The plantations are profitable, disciplined, and deeply unstable. Beneath the glittering wealth, anger gathers like heat before a storm. The air in a cane field at night feels heavy. Leaves brush against one another with a dry hiss. Fires glow in the distance. Messages travel quietly from person to person. In 1791, a massive uprising begins among the enslaved population of Saint Domingue. It grows into the Haitian Revolution, one of the most important revolutions in world history. Enslaved people, free people of colour, French officials, planters, Spanish and British forces and revolutionary politics all collide in a struggle that transforms the Atlantic world. You feel the tension in the night before revolt. The smell of rain mixes with smoke. Feet move along hidden paths. Voices lower. No one here is an abstract symbol. People are tired, grieving, angry, afraid, determined. The Haitian Revolution is not merely a reaction to cruelty, though cruelty is everywhere. It is also political intelligence, military organization, spiritual strength, and a claim to universal freedom more serious than the elegant declarations written by men who still owned human beings. History has a way of exposing bad footnotes. A quirky tidbit often discussed around the uprising is the ceremony at Bois Caïmont, said to have taken place in August 1791. Accounts describe a Vodou gathering that helped inspire revolt, though details are debated because surviving descriptions were shaped by rumour, fear, and hostile observers. Whether every element happened exactly as later stories claim remains uncertain, but the event has become a powerful symbol of spiritual and political unity in Haitian memory. The revolution does not unfold gently. It is complicated, shifting, and brutal in many directions, involving war, alliances, betrayals, disease, and changing laws in France. Yet its central outcome is astonishing. Enslaved people overthrow slavery and colonial rule, and Haiti declares independence in 1804. Sugar's most profitable colony becomes the site of slavery's greatest defeat in the Atlantic world. The cane fields that once fed French wealth become ground where freedom is claimed at enormous cost. As dawn rises over the hills, mist lifts from the trees, the cane below glitters with dew. Smoke from distant settlements thins into the pale sky. You hear footsteps on a hidden trail, then silence. Resistance has many sounds: a drum, a whisper, a snapped tool, a treaty, a battle cry, a child learning a name not given by a master. In the world of sugar, sweetness could build chains, but it also sharpened the desire to break them. The fields remember both. You stand at the edge of a plantation in a morning that should feel peaceful, but does not. The cane leaves shine with dew. Birds call from the hedges. The smell of damp earth rises softly as the sun warms the ground. Yet the air carries a strain, a silence after an old system has been shaken but not truly laid to rest. Legal slavery is ending in some places, or already ended, but the fields remain. The mills remain. The hunger for profit remains. Sitting there with its hands folded, pretending it has learned manners, abolition does not arrive as one single event across the sugar world. It comes unevenly, through revolt, law, pressure, war, religious activism, economic change, political struggle, and the relentless resistance of enslaved people themselves. The British Empire abolishes the slave trade in 1807 and slavery itself in the 1830s. Other empires and republics follow different timelines. In the French colonies, slavery is abolished in 1794, restored by Napoleon in 1802, and abolished again in 1848. Brazil, a giant of sugar and slavery, does not abolish slavery until 1888. Freedom, in history, often arrives late, tired, and carrying too many conditions. You walk past the plantation yard where people gather to hear new rules read aloud. Some listen with hope, some with suspicion. Some already understand that a signature on paper does not instantly change the soil beneath their feet. In several British colonies, emancipation includes an apprenticeship system, which forces formerly enslaved people to continue working for former enslavers for a number of years before full freedom. It is presented as transition, discipline, preparation, very generous if one ignores the part where freedom is asked to wait politely outside the gate. The mainstream historical fact here is clear after abolition. Sugar plantations faced labour shortages and rising labour costs, so planters sought new systems to keep production going. Formerly enslaved people often tried to leave plantation labour, negotiate wages, farm their own plots, reunite families, build churches and schools, and claim control over time. Planters, meanwhile, wanted a dependable workforce at low cost. This conflict shaped the post-emancipation sugar world. You step into a village formed by formerly enslaved people. The houses are small, but the atmosphere is different from the estate quarters. Smoke rises from cooking fires. Children run barefoot over packed earth. Someone repairs a roof. A woman tends a garden where yams, cassava, peppers, or vegetables grow in careful patches. The smell is sharp with wood smoke, green leaves, and boiling food. Here, freedom is not abstract. It is choosing when to plant, choosing where to worship, choosing whom to live with, choosing, perhaps, to avoid the cane field whenever possible, which is honestly a very understandable choice. Sugar planters respond by importing indentured labourers, especially from India, but also from China, Madeira, Java, and other regions depending on colony and period. Indenture contracts promise wages, passage, housing, and eventual return or settlement. In practice, conditions are often harsh, with low pay, strict discipline, limited legal protection, poor housing, and heavy work. The language of contract replaces the language of ownership, but power remains badly unequal. A chain can be removed while the road is still blocked. You board a crowded ship carrying indentured workers across the ocean. The deck smells of salt, sickness, rice, sweat, damp wood, and fear. People carry bundles, memories, and uncertainty. Some have left because of poverty, debt, famine, deception, or hope for wages. Recruiters may have promised opportunity. The sea answers with rolling discomfort. Children cry. Adults stare at the horizon. The journey itself becomes part of the sugar story. Another migration pulled by distant demand. In colonies such as British Guiana, Trinidad, Mauritius, Fiji, Natal, and parts of the Caribbean. Indian indentured labour becomes central to sugar production after emancipation. Workers cut cane, weed fields, maintain irrigation, and labour in mills under strict plantation rules. They bring languages, religions, food traditions, music, family structures, and festivals that reshape societies permanently. The sugar estate tries to absorb them as labour, but people arrive with whole worlds inside them. A quirky tidbit rests in the word coolie, once used widely in colonial labour systems for Asian workers. Today it is often considered offensive because of its history of racialized exploitation and contempt. Its use in old records can feel cold and careless, reducing diverse people to a labour category. History loves categories because they fit in ledgers. Human beings, inconveniently, do not. You pause beside a cane field where indentured workers bend under the heat. Their feet press into mud. Cane leaves scrape their arms. The smell of crushed stalks mixes with sweat and smoke from the mill. A supervisor watches from a distance. The work is not identical to slavery, and it is important not to flatten all suffering into one shape. Yet it is also wrong to pretend this is free labour in a modern equal sense. Contracts, debt, punishment, isolation, and colonial law restrict choices sharply. Historians still debate how to compare indenture with slavery without erasing the differences between them. Some emphasise indenture as a new coercive labour regime built to preserve plantation profits after abolition. Others stress the agency of migrants who negotiated, resisted, saved money, formed families, and sometimes used the system for their own goals despite its injustices. Both truths can sit uneasily together. People can be exploited and still make choices. Systems can be brutal without making their victims passive. The post-emancipation plantation becomes a place of negotiation and conflict. Formerly enslaved communities demand wages and land. Indentured workers resist unfair treatment through desertion, protest, work slowdowns, court petitions, and strikes. Planters complain constantly. which is one of the most reliable sounds in colonial archives. Governments pass vagrancy laws, contract laws, and labour regulations to pressure workers back into estates. Freedom is shaped not only by moral ideals, but by who controls land, wages, police, and courts. You enter a sugar mill in the late 19th century. The machinery is stronger now, more industrial in some places, with steam power beginning to transform production. Metal parts clang, boilers hiss, the floor trembles. The smell of molasses is heavy and almost intoxicating. Workers move through heat and noise, their lives tied to machines that make production faster but not necessarily kinder. The sugar looks cleaner by the time it travels, but the labour system remains cloudy. Outside, evening settles over the cane. A bell rings somewhere on the estate. In a nearby settlement, someone lights a lamp and the smell of curry leaves, cassava, beans, or salted fish drifts through the dusk, depending on the place and people gathered there. Songs rise in different languages. The world made by sugar is changing, becoming more mixed, more legally free, and still deeply unequal. Abolition breaks a monstrous law, but it does not sweeten the old ground by itself. The aftertaste is bitter, and it lingers. You step into Europe during a season of shortages, war, and restless invention. The fields are colder here, the light paler, the air edged with damp wind instead of tropical heat. Mud clings to your boots, bare trees scratch the sky. In a farmhouse kitchen, a pot simmers over the fire, and the smell rising from it is earthy, faintly sweet, and not especially glamorous. This is not cane. This is beet, humble, dirty, root-shaped beet, sitting in the corner like it has no idea it's about to disturb a global empire of sweetness. The sugar beet is not dramatic to look at. It is pale, thick, and rough-skinned, with green leaves spreading close to the soil. You pull one from the ground and feel its weight in your hands. Cold mud sticks to its sides. When sliced open, the flesh is firm and white. It does not offer the easy pleasure of cane juice running from a stalk. Its sweetness is hidden, locked inside cells, waiting for chemistry, pressure, and patience. Cane flirts. Beet makes you work for it. A mainstream historical fact gives this root its importance in the 18th century. European scientists discovered that sugar from beets was chemically the same as sugar from cane. The German chemist Andreas Marggraf identified sugar in beet roots in 1747, and his student Franz Karl Achard later helped develop practical beet sugar production. At first, the idea seems interesting but not revolutionary. Cane sugar still dominates markets. Tropical plantations still supply Europe. A beet is a curiosity. Then politics enters the kitchen, as politics always does, usually without wiping its boots. During the Napoleonic Wars, British naval power and continental blockades disrupt access to imported cane sugar. Napoleon encourages beet sugar production in France and other parts of Europe as a way to reduce dependence on overseas supplies. Suddenly, the quiet route becomes strategic. Sweetness is no longer only a colonial commodity arriving by ship. It can be coaxed from European soil, processed in factories, and used to challenge maritime trade. The beet looks up from the mud and says, metaphorically of course, that it would like a seat at the table. You walk into an early beet sugar works. The building smells of wet roots, steam, lime, smoke, and machinery grease. Workers wash the beets to remove soil. Water splashes over wooden troughs. Knives slice the roots into thin strips or pulp. The texture under your fingers is crisp and damp, like a vegetable that has been drafted into industrial service. The sliced beet is soaked or diffused in hot water to draw out the sugar. The liquid becomes cloudy, earthy, and sweet. This is not the warm green scent of cane being crushed. Beet sugar production has a colder smell, heavier and more mineral. The juice must be purified, often using lime and carbon dioxide in later refining methods. then concentrated through boiling and evaporation. Steam fills the room, condensation beads on walls, boots stick slightly to the floor, the workers listen to pumps, scrapers, boiling pans, and valves. Sugar is becoming more scientific, more mechanical, more European in its supply chain. A quirky tidbit sits in the early public reaction. Some people doubted beet sugar could truly match cane sugar. Taste, habit, and prestige clung to cane. Imported cane sugar had centuries of glamour behind it, although glamour is a very strange word to use for something tied to plantation suffering. Beet sugar had to prove itself. It came from a root grown in ordinary fields, near turnips, potatoes, and other vegetables that rarely receive applause. Imagine trying to convince elegant households that their refined sweetness now begins in something that looks like livestock feed. Marketing departments were not yet ready, but they were needed. Historians still argue over how decisive Napoleon's policies were in creating the beet sugar industry. Some emphasize wartime necessity and state support as the key forces that pushed beet sugar forward. Others point to longer scientific developments, agricultural experimentation, and later industrial improvements that made beet sugar truly competitive. The answer sits somewhere among laboratories, blockades, factories, farmers, and accountants. History is rarely polite enough to name one parent. You walk through a beet field in northern France or Central Europe. The air is cool and smells of soil and leaves. Unlike cane, beet fits into temperate agriculture. It can be rotated with other crops. It grows where sugarcane cannot. Farmers learn to select varieties with higher sugar content. Breeders improve the root. Factories are built near fields, because beets are bulky and lose quality after harvest. The geography of sweetness changes. Sugar no longer depends entirely on tropical colonies, though colonial sugar does not vanish. It now has a rival rooted in European mud. The social effects are wide. Beet sugar supports rural industry, seasonal labour, scientific farming growths, and new factory towns. It links chemists with farmers and manufacturers. It encourages governments to think about tariffs, subsidies, and national self-sufficiency. Sugar becomes part of economic policy. A spoonful of sweetness can now involve agricultural research and state planning, which is less romantic than a rose-scented syrup, but very effective. You stand near a factory yard at dusk. Wagons arrive loaded with beets, their wheels grinding through mud. Horses snort in the cold air. Workers unload the roots into piles. The beets knock against one another with dull thuds. Inside, machines continue humming, and steam rises into the darkening sky. The atmosphere is not luxurious. It is practical, smoky, and stubborn. This sweetness belongs to industry and winter, to boots, ledgers, and laboratory glass. Beet sugar also changes moral debates in complicated ways. Some abolitionists and critics of slavery promoted beet sugar or free labour sugar as an alternative to cane sugar produced by enslaved labour. Yet beet sugar's growth was not purely humanitarian. It was also about profit, war, protectionism, and national markets. Human motives, as usual, refused to stay in separate jars. A consumer might choose beet sugar to avoid slave-produced cane, while a government might support it to strengthen industry. Both can be true at the same breakfast table. The final crystals look familiar. White, dry, sparkling. Once dissolved in tea or stirred into jam, beet sugar and cane sugar are chemically the same sweet molecule. The origin disappears on the tongue. That disappearance is powerful. It means sugar can detach from climate, empire, and landscape more easily than before. The consumer tastes sweetness, not tropical heat or European mud, not plantation or factory, not ship or field. Night settles over the beet works. Frost gathers near the yard. Steam fades upward into cold air. Your hands smell faintly of earth and sugar. In the quiet, the beet seems almost comic in its modesty, yet it has changed the map of sweetness. It gives Europe a homegrown source of sugar, weakens cane's monopoly, and ties chemistry to daily taste. The modern world will not be sweetened by cane alone. Beneath the soil, another sweetness has been waiting, pale, patient, and surprisingly ambitious. You enter a 19th century refinery where sweetness has put on a soot-stained coat and learned to speak in the language of engines. The building is tall, a brick, and warm from within. Outside, carts rattle over stone streets, and horses steam in the cold air. Inside, the floor trembles faintly. Pipes hiss, pulleys turn, men shout over machinery. The smell is dense and strange: raw sugar, molasses, coal smoke, lime, hot metal, damp sacks, and river mud carried in from the docks. This is sugar becoming modern, not gentle, not decorative, not resting in a silver bowl, but industrial. Raw sugar arrives from cane colonies and beet factories, often dark, sticky, and uneven. Refiners transform it into cleaner, whiter, more predictable crystals. That whiteness matters enormously to consumers. It suggests purity, status, hygiene, and quality, even when the history behind the product is anything but spotless. Human beings do enjoy believing that a clean surface means a clean story. Sugar takes full advantage. You walk past barrels and hogsheads stacked in a warehouse. The wood is damp under your fingers. Molasses seeps in dark streaks, giving the air a heavy, fermented sweetness. Dock workers roll casks from ships to storage, their boots scraping grit and spilled syrup. In ports across Europe and North America, sugar refineries become part of the industrial city. They sit near rivers, docks, railways, coal supplies, and labour markets. Sweetness now belongs to urban smoke as much as tropical sunlight. A mainstream historical fact anchors this world during the 19th century. Improvements in refining, steam power, transport, and mass production helped to make sugar cheaper and more widely available. Railways moved beets and refined sugar inland. Steamships moved raw sugar and finished products across oceans more reliably. Larger factories processed greater volumes. The price of sugar fell over time in many markets, and consumption rose. What once impressed nobles now entered ordinary cupboards with increasing confidence. You climb a metal stairway inside the refinery. The rail is warm and faintly sticky. Below, liquid sugar moves through stages of clarification, filtration, boiling, crystallization, and drying. Bone char filtration becomes widely used in some refineries to whiten cane sugar, a fact that surprises many later consumers. Yes, at one point, animal bones helped to make sugar look pure. History has a talent for making the word pure slightly awkward. The refining process is careful and technical. Raw sugar is dissolved, cleaned of impurities, filtered, concentrated, and crystallized under controlled conditions. Vacuum pans become especially important because they allow syrup to boil at lower temperatures, reducing burning and improving quality. Crystals form more evenly. Centrifuges spin molasses away from sugar with impressive speed. The machine hums, then roars, and damp crystals separate from dark syrup. It is not exactly lullaby material, but it is beautifully efficient. You stand near a centrifuge as it begins to spin. The floor vibrates through your shoes. Warm air brushes your face. The sound grows from a low rumble to a hard mechanical whine. When the process ends, pale sugar clings inside the drum, cleaner than before. Molasses runs away in a darker stream. This separation is one of the great industrial gestures of sugar to divide brightness from shadow, crystal from residue, marketable purity from sticky remainder. Molasses does not simply vanish. It becomes animal feed, rum, industrial alcohol, yeast production, and other goods. Nothing in sugar production stays merely waste if someone can make money from it. Capitalism looks at a puddle of brown syrup and immediately asks whether it has a business plan. Often, annoyingly, it does. Historians still debate how much falling sugar prices changed nutrition compared with broader changes in wages, grain prices, urbanization, and food distribution. Sugar clearly became more common, but its meaning varied. For some families, it was a cheap source of calories and comfort. For others, it was an ingredient in new commercial foods. For reformers, it raised questions about habit, health, and industrial diets. The same spoonful could be treat, fuel, luxury, or worry, depending on who was holding it. You step into a worker's kitchen in an industrial town. The room is small, with a blackened grate, a wooden table, and a window filmed with damp. The air smells of tea, bread, coal smoke, and laundry drying too slowly. A jar of sugar sits on the shelf. It is not full, but it is present. A mother spoons some into tea. A child watches closely. Sweet tea warms cold hands after factory work or errands in rain. Sugar becomes part of survival rituals, not because it is nourishing in every way, but because it is quick, pleasant, and affordable enough to matter. In shops, sugar appears in more forms: granulated sugar, loaf sugar, powdered sugar, brown sugar, syrups, treacle, candies, preserves, biscuits, and sweetened drinks. Packaging improves. Branding begins to shape trust. Customers learn to recognize names, grades, and prices. The grocer's shop smells of soap, flour, dried fruit, coffee, cheese, and sugar. Scoop scrape bins. Paper twists around purchases. The sweetness that once arrived as guarded loaves now moves through retail routines with almost casual ease. A quirky tidbit belongs to sugar cubes. They were developed in the 19th century and became popular because they offered neat, measured sweetness without cutting hard loaves. One story credits a Czech sugar producer, Jakub Krzysztof Rad, with inventing cube sugar in the 1840s after his wife injured herself cutting sugar from a loaf. Whether every detail of that tale is polished by retelling, the result is very practical. Sugar becomes tidy, polite, and less likely to attack your fingers before tea. Industrial sugar also changes baking. Cakes become lighter and more common as refined flour. Chemical leavening, ovens, and affordable sugar spread. Biscuits and sweets can be produced commercially on a large scale. Jam making grows as sugar becomes cheaper, preserving fruit for wider households. Childhood treats multiply. Holidays grow sweeter. The calendar itself becomes sugared through birthdays, Christmas cakes, festival sweets, and little rewards for good behaviour, or at least behaviour quiet enough to satisfy tired adults. Yet the factory world has its own costs. Refinery work can be dangerous, hot, and physically demanding. Urban pollution darkens streets and lungs. Plantation labour continues in many cane regions under unequal systems. Beet workers face seasonal hardship in rural Europe. Industrial progress does not erase exploitation. It often reorganises it, adds machinery, and calls the result improvement. Sometimes it is improvement. Sometimes it is only faster extraction with better lighting. You leave the refinery as evening lowers over the city. Smoke drifts above rooftops. Gas lamps glow along wet streets. A cart passes carrying sacks marked for shops inland. Somewhere, crystals are cooling in bulk. Somewhere else, a child will taste a sweet biscuit and think only of pleasure, which is fair enough. Sugar has become cleaner, cheaper, and more ordinary. The modern taste is being refined not only in pans and centrifuges, but in habits, shops, factories, and homes, until sweetness feels less like treasure and more like expectation. You step into a street bright with shop windows, painted signs, and the warm, buttery smell of baking. The city around you is louder now. Hooves strike the road, tram bells ring, factory whistles call people to time. A child presses both hands against a confectioner's window, leaving small foggy marks on the glass, and inside the display, Sugar has become colour, shape, promise, and temptation. Peppermints gleam in jars. Toffees sit wrapped like little secrets. Boiled sweets catch the light as if someone has trapped stained glass in a mouthful. Sugar is no longer simply an ingredient. It is becoming an experience sold through wonder. In the 19th and early 20th centuries, industrial production makes sweets cheaper and more varied. New machinery pulls, cuts, stamps, wraps, moulds, and packages candy at a scale earlier confectioners could hardly imagine. The sweet shop becomes a small theatre of desire, and the child outside the window understands the plot immediately. The plot is, please give me that, all of that, possibly now. You enter the shop. A bell above the door gives a bright little cry. The air smells of mint, caramel, chocolate, fruit flavouring, paper, polished wood, and warm sugar. Glass jars line the shelves in orderly rows. Some hold striped sticks, some hold sugared almonds, some hold hard candy shaped like drops, lozenges, buttons, or tiny fruit. The counter is smooth beneath your fingertips, worn by coins and elbows. Behind it, the shopkeeper uses metal scoops and paper bags with crisp, practiced movements. A mainstream historical fact belongs here. Mass-produced candy expanded rapidly in the industrial age because sugar, glucose syrups, chocolate processing, flavourings, and wrapping technologies became more accessible. Companies learned to produce sweets consistently and distribute them widely through shops, fairs, railway stalls, and later national brands. Candy moved from occasional handmade luxury toward affordable pleasure. Not equal for everyone, of course, but far more visible and available than in earlier centuries. You pick up a wrapped sweet and feel the paper twist at both ends. That little twist matters. Wrapping keeps candy clean, portable, and marketable. It also turns each piece into a tiny gift to the self. The sound of unwrapping becomes part of the pleasure. A crackle, a pause. Then the sweet touches the tongue. Hard candy warms slowly in the mouth. Toffee pulls at the teeth. Fudge yields softly. Caramel clings with the confidence of someone who's never feared dental bills. The rise of candy reshapes childhood. Earlier societies certainly gave children treats, but the modern candy market makes sweetness more closely tied to innocence. Reward, pocket money, school outings, holidays, and birthdays. Children become visible consumers. Their desires matter to advertisers, shopkeepers, and manufacturers. A penny can buy a small sweet, and that purchase teaches choice, craving, saving, bargaining, and perhaps the ancient art of asking one parent after the other has said no. Yet candy is not only for children. Adults enjoy it too, often while claiming they bought it for someone younger. Sweets appear at railway kiosks, theatre stalls, seaside resorts, fairs, and holiday markets. A worker buys a paper bag of humbugs, a couple shares chocolates, a traveller sucks a lozenge on a smoky train. Sweetness becomes mobile, suited to modern movement. It slips into pockets and handbags, ready to soften boredom, nerves, hunger, or silence. You pass a fairground at dusk. Lamps glow over stalls. The ground is trampled and smells of mud, sawdust, fried batter, horses, and sugar. Candy floss spins into pale clouds, ridiculous and magical. Toffee apples shine red under the lights. A vendor cracks brittle into jagged pieces. Children laugh near a carousel, its music wheezing cheerfully through the evening. Here sugar is spectacle. It is sticky fingers, paper cones, bright tongues, and the thrilling possibility of feeling slightly sick and calling it happiness. A quirky tidbit belongs to cotton candy, known in some places as candy floss or fairy floss. It became famous after machines spun melted sugar into fine threads, creating a sweet that is mostly air, and yet somehow irresistible. It is one of humanity's finest examples of turning almost nothing into a profitable cloud. You touch it and it collapses instantly, dissolving on the tongue like a pink whisper. A very dramatic whisper. But still, advertising gives sugar a new voice. Posters, newspaper notices, packaging, trade cards, and later radio jingles teach consumers to connect sweets with energy, love, celebration, health, modernity, and good parenting. Some claims are charming, others are dubious enough to make a modern eyebrow rise quietly in the dark. Sweet foods are presented as wholesome treats, quick nourishment, or moral rewards. A chocolate bar can become adventure. A biscuit can become family affection. A candy tin can become a memory before it's even empty. Historians still argue over how much advertising created new desires and how much it simply amplified cravings already present in changing urban societies. People had always enjoyed sweetness, but mass marketing gave that desire fresh images, slogans, colours, and habits. Scholars also debate how children's consumer culture developed across class, gender, and region. A sweet shop in London, Chicago, Bombay, Melbourne, or Buenos Aires did not mean exactly the same thing. Even when the glass jars looked inviting in similar ways, chocolate deserves its own soft place in this sugared world. Cacao is naturally bitter, but sugar helps transform it into bars, creams, coatings, and filled confections. Industrial chocolate making allows smoother textures and cheaper production. Milk chocolate becomes widely popular after developments in processing and mixing. You hold a small square on your tongue and feel it soften. The smell is warm, roasted, and comforting. Sugar does not work alone here. It collaborates with fat, flavour, heat, and clever machinery to create a new kind of everyday luxury. Packaging turns sweets into gifts, decorative tins, printed boxes, ribbons, and colourful labels make sugar emotionally expressive. You can give chocolates to apologise, celebrate, flirt, comfort, or avoid thinking of a more original present. The box says affection with a convenience that humanity clearly appreciates. Seasonal sweets multiply candy canes, Easter eggs, festival candies, wedding favours, birthday cakes with icing. Sugar becomes part of how modern people mark time. Still, unease follows the pleasure. Dentists warn about decay. Moralists complain about indulgence. Parents negotiate with children. Doctors wonder about diet. Teachers find sticky wrappers in places no wrapper should be. The sweet shop is innocent and not innocent, joyful and commercial, playful and carefully engineered. Sugar has learned to smile through a shop window. Night settles over the street. The confectioner lowers the blinds. The jars remain faintly visible in the dimness, their colours muted like sleeping jewels. A child walks home with one sweet tucked carefully in a pocket, saving it for later, making pleasure last by delaying it. You can hear the paper crinkle softly with each step. Sugar has become memory, marketing, childhood, celebration, and small private reward. The modern world is learning not only to eat sweetness, but to dream in it. You enter a kitchen where the sugar jar is nearly empty, and the quiet around it feels heavier than the jar itself. Morning light comes weakly through the window. The room smells of coal smoke, boiled potatoes, damp cloth, and tea stretched thin because comfort must now be measured carefully. A ration book lies on the table, its pages worn soft at the edges from being handled again and again. You touch the paper, and it feels fragile, official, and faintly greasy from kitchen fingers. War changes sweetness by making absence visible. In peacetime, sugar can disappear into habit so completely that no one thinks much about it. It is stirred into tea, baked into cakes, boiled into jam, packed into chocolate, and offered to children as if sweetness has always belonged there. Then war comes, shipping lanes become dangerous, governments control supplies, and suddenly every spoonful has weight. Sugar becomes not just taste, but policy. During the First and Second World Wars, sugar is rationed in many countries because shipping, agriculture, military supply, and civilian need all compete under pressure. In Britain during the Second World War, sugar rationing begins in 1940 and continues for years. Civilians receive limited weekly amounts, and households learn to adapt recipes, save scraps, use substitutes, and treat sweetness as something to plan rather than assume. The sugar bowl becomes a small classroom in scarcity. You sit with a family at breakfast. The tea is pale and hot. A child watches as a parent measures sugar with deliberate care. 1 spoon, perhaps less. The sound of the spoon against the cup seems unusually loud. Nobody wants to waste a grain. The child may not fully understand convoys, submarines, trade routes, bombed docks, beet crops, and government ministries. But the child understands that the cake is smaller, the jam is thinner, and asking for extra is not a casual question. The atmosphere of rationing has its own texture. Cupboards are inspected with hope and disappointment. Paper packets are folded shut and saved. Recipes are clipped from newspapers. Neighbours exchange tips. A little syrup from canned fruit might be poured into pudding. Carrots, beets, dried fruit, saccharin, or honey may be used where available. Wartime cooks become experts in making less appear like enough, which is a skill both noble and deeply annoying to acquire. In a government leaflet, sugar is discussed as nutrition, morale, and logistics. It provides quick energy and helps preserve food, especially fruit. Jam making matters because it turns seasonal produce into stored calories. Yet sugar must be controlled because imports are limited and military needs are urgent. Soldiers require compact, durable foods. Chocolate and sweets can travel in rations, lift spirits, and provide energy. Sweetness marches to war in pockets, packs, tins, and emergency kits. You open a soldier's ration tin. The smell is metallic, stale, and faintly sweet. There may be chocolate, hard candy, or sweetened condensed milk depending on place and period. These items are not luxurious in the ordinary sense, but in mud, cold, fear, and fatigue. A sweet taste can feel like a message from another world. A square of chocolate warms slowly in the mouth. A boiled sweet lasts through a march. Condensed milk thickens tea into something almost tender. The battlefield does not become gentle, but sweetness gives the body a brief argument for continuing. A quirky tidbit belongs to the strange wartime life of candy. In some militaries, hard sweets are valued because they resist spoilage and can be carried easily. Chocolate, though beloved, has one tragic flaw: it melts. Military planners therefore experiment with heat-resistant chocolate and emergency bars designed more for endurance than pleasure. Imagine being so practical about chocolate that you nearly remove its joy. Necessary, perhaps, still emotionally questionable. Historians still debate how much rationing improved or harmed civilian diets in different countries. In some places, rationing made food distribution more equal and encouraged diets with fewer sweets and more controlled portions. In others, shortages, black markets, poverty, occupation, and disrupted agriculture caused real hunger and malnutrition. Sugar rationing alone cannot tell the whole story. It sits inside larger systems of food access, class, geography, and state power. A ration book may promise fairness, but the road from promise to plate is never perfectly smooth. You walk through a wartime shop. Shelves are sparse. The shop smells of paper, dust, turnips, soap, and the faint sweetness of boiled sweets kept behind the counter. Customers queue with bags and coupons. Conversation is low, practical, sometimes edged with irritation. A person asks whether any sugar has come in. The shopkeeper shakes his head or reaches for the scale. Every purchase is recorded, limited, watched. The drama is quiet, but not small. Daily life has become an exercise in arithmetic. Black markets appear wherever scarcity meets desire. Sugar can be hoarded, traded, stolen, or sold illegally. This does not mean everyone becomes villains the moment cake is threatened. Although humanity has had weaker moments, it means scarcity creates uneven chances. A person with connections may find extra. A person with money may buy what others cannot. A person with a garden may preserve fruit. A person without one must make do. War exposes the hidden structure of everyday comfort. In occupied territories, sugar shortages can be sharper, tied to requisition, destroyed transport, military extraction, and economic control. In some colonies, sugar production is redirected toward imperial needs, and local people may experience scarcity even while crops leave their regions. Sweetness, like many wartime goods, follows power, the field, the factory, the ship, the soldier, and the civilian table all compete in a chain where not every hunger counts equally. You return to the kitchen as evening falls. The family prepares a pudding made with breadcrumbs, dried fruit, perhaps a little treacle if fortune has been kind. Steam fogs the window. The smell is warm, plain, and comforting. Everyone knows it is not the old recipe. The cake has no thick icing. The jam is not lavish. But when the pudding is served, the first spoonful still matters. It says, "We are here. We have made something sweet from what remains." Sugar rationing often lasts beyond the end of fighting, because economies, shipping, agriculture, and trade do not recover overnight. Peace may be declared before cupboards feel peaceful. In Britain, sweets and sugar rationing continue into the early 1950s. Children born during war may grow up thinking controlled sweetness is normal, then remember the sudden abundance of unrationed candy as almost magical. The end of rationing can feel like a festival in the mouth. Night settles, the ration book is closed, the sugar packet is folded with care and put away. Outside, the street is darkened by blackout rules or dimmed by worry. Inside, a cup of tea warms both hands. You feel how war reveals the depth of sugar's place in modern life. When sweetness is limited, people notice not only the taste, but the rituals around it: the birthday cake, the spoon in tea, the jam jar, the chocolate saved for someone loved. Scarcity turns sugar back into treasure, not because it is new, but because everyone suddenly remembers what comfort tastes like. You step into a laboratory where sweetness no longer smells only of fields, smoke, and boiling pans. Here the air is sharper, cleaner, and faintly metallic. Glass tubes catch the light. Stainless steel surfaces feel cool beneath your fingertips. A machine hums with patient confidence, the kind of confidence only machines and very senior administrators seem to possess. Outside, trucks move toward factories. Inside, chemists watch liquids turn clear, thick, and sweet without ever seeing a cane stalk or beetroot in the room. Sugar has entered the age of new chemistry. The modern food industry does not stop at granulated crystals. It asks a very industrial question: can sweetness be made cheaper, smoother, more flexible, easier to mix, easier to ship, and better suited to bottles, cans, cereals, sauces, and snacks? The answer arrives through syrups, enzymes, starch conversion, and factory-scale processing. Sweetness becomes less visible, slipping into foods where you may not expect it. It becomes background music for the tongue. Corn syrup is one of the major players in this transformation. It is made by breaking down cornstarch into glucose and other sugars. Later, high fructose corn syrup is produced by using enzymes to convert some of that glucose into fructose, creating a syrup with sweetness and handling qualities useful for many processed foods and drinks. The mainstream historical fact is simple in the 20th century, especially from the 1970s onward in the United States. High fructose corn syrup becomes widely used in soft drinks and processed foods. You stand beside a large industrial tank. It is not romantic. No one is writing poetry to the tank, which is perhaps unfair because it works very hard. Corn arrives as grain, dry and golden. It is milled, steeped, separated, and processed until starch becomes the raw material for syrup. Enzymes do their quiet work, cutting long chains into smaller sugars. The liquid thickens and clarifies. Pumps move it through pipes. The smell is faintly sweet, warm, and grainy, with a damp cereal note that lingers in the air. This sweetness is not crystalline. It pours. It blends easily into beverages. It helps control texture, browning, moisture, and shelf life. It can keep baked goods soft, make candies smooth, and sweeten drinks without the need to dissolve dry sugar. For manufacturers, syrup is convenient. Convenience, in industrial history, is often another word for destiny with a barcode. You enter a bottling plant. The sound is rhythmic, an almost hypnotic clink, hiss, fill, cap, label, roll. Empty bottles move in rows, then emerge full and shining, syrup, flavouring, water, carbonation, and colour combine into soft drinks that become symbols of modern pleasure. The air smells of citrus, caramel colouring, cleaning chemicals, and cold metal. A worker's gloves feel rubbery and damp. Conveyor belts carry sweetness faster than any hand could manage. Soft drinks change the way sugar is consumed. Instead of sweetness chewed slowly in fruit, cake, or candy, it can be swallowed quickly in liquid form. A bottle in a vending machine, a cup at a cinema, a can pulled from a refrigerator. These moments make sweetness immediate and portable. It fits cars, offices, schools, sports events, and late-night kitchens lit by one lonely fridge bulb. Modernity gives sugar wheels, fizz, and advertising jingles. A quirky tidbit belongs to the strange invisibility of syrup. When people see a spoonful of sugar, they understand sweetness is being added. When sweetness is dissolved into a sauce, bread, ketchup, salad dressing, breakfast cereal, or flavoured yogurt, it becomes harder to notice. Sugar has gone undercover. It is not exactly wearing sunglasses and a fake moustache, but nutritionally speaking, it has entered the building quietly. Corn syrup also has agricultural roots. In the United States, corn production, farm policy, industrial processing, and food manufacturing all shape the rise of corn-based sweeteners. Corn becomes not only a food in itself, but a raw material for starches, syrups, oils, animal feed, fuel, and countless processed ingredients. A field of corn under a wide summer sky may look peaceful, leaves rattling in a dry wind, but it is connected to laboratories, subsidies, factories, supermarkets, and global trade. Historians and food scholars still debate how much high-fructose corn syrup itself changed diets compared with broader shifts in portion sizes, advertising, processed food availability, sedentary lifestyles, and overall calorie intake. Some emphasize its role in sweetened beverages and cheap industrial food. Others caution that the body's response to sugar depends on total diet and context, and that cane sugar, beet sugar, and corn-based sweeteners all contribute to excessive sweetness when consumed heavily. The argument is less about one villainous syrup, and more about an entire food environment that learned to sweeten almost everything. You walk down a supermarket aisle. The lights are bright. The floor is smooth and faintly cold through your shoes. Packages glow in cheerful colours. Breakfast cereals, cookies, sauces, granola bars, fruit drinks, breads, frozen meals, condiments. The smell is paper, plastic, coffee from somewhere nearby, and the sweet vanilla note of packaged snacks. Sugar and syrups appear under many names on labels: sucrose, glucose, fructose, dextrose, maltose, corn syrup, and vert sugar. The vocabulary expands until reading a label feels like attending a small chemistry lecture you did not request. Yet chemistry also creates alternatives: saccharin, cyclamate, aspartame, sucralose, acasulfame potassium, stevia extracts, and other non-sugar sweeteners enter markets at different times. They promise sweetness with fewer or no calories, Some are embraced, questioned, restricted, reformulated, or debated. Their aftertastes become part of daily life. You sip a diet drink and notice sweetness arriving without the usual body of sugar, a bright taste followed by a faint echo that some people enjoy and others regard with deep personal suspicion. The sensory world of these new sweeteners is different. Sugar has weight. Syrup has body. Non-sugar sweeteners can taste intensely sweet in tiny amounts, but they may not brown, ferment, crystallize, or preserve like sugar. Food scientists blend ingredients to mimic texture and mouthfeel. Sweetness becomes a design problem. The tongue is the customer, but chemistry is backstage adjusting the lighting. In a factory test kitchen, technicians try samples under fluorescent lights. A cookie must remain soft, a drink must taste refreshing, a sauce must cling, a cereal must crunch. The air smells of vanilla, toasted grain, fruit flavouring, and hot plastic trays. People take notes with serious expressions while tasting things that may one day appear casually in lunch boxes. There is something both impressive and slightly funny about science, concentrating so deeply on whether a snack feels right between the teeth. By evening, the laboratory windows reflect the room back at itself. The tanks keep humming. Somewhere, cornfields darken under a warm sky. Somewhere else, a child opens a soda, a commuter unwraps a bar, and a family pours sauce from a bottle without thinking of enzymes, starch, or industrial design. Sugar has not disappeared. It has multiplied into syrups, substitutes, formulations, and hidden ingredients. Sweetness is no longer only harvested. It is engineered, optimized, and quietly poured through the pipelines of modern appetite. You enter a doctor's waiting room where sugar has stopped looking purely cheerful. The chairs are stiff. The air smells faintly of disinfectant, paper files, coffee cooling in a paper cup, and mint from someone's nervous breath. A poster on the wall shows a smiling tooth holding a toothbrush, which is honestly a little unsettling if you look at it too long. On a nearby table, magazines promise health, energy, beauty, discipline, and desserts that are somehow guilt-free. Because modern culture enjoys giving cake a moral philosophy. Sugar now sits at the centre of argument. It is comfort, celebration, childhood memory, quick energy, and culinary pleasure. It is also accused of damaging teeth, encouraging weight gain, shaping industrial diets, and hiding inside processed foods. The debate is not new, but in the 20th and 21st centuries it grows louder, more scientific, more commercial, and more emotional. Sweetness becomes a battlefield where doctors, parents, advertisers, governments, food companies, and tired people at vending machines all meet. You begin with teeth, because teeth are often the first witnesses. Dental decay has many causes, but frequent sugar consumption feeds bacteria in the mouth that produce acids, which can wear down enamel. That is a mainstream historical and medical fact, and it helps explain why dentists have spent generations giving sugar the side eye. You sit in the dental chair, feeling the vinyl cool under your hands. A drill whirs somewhere in another room. The smell of latex gloves and clove-like dental paste floats in the air. Suddenly, every caramel you have ever eaten seems to be testifying against you. Candy, sweet drinks, sticky snacks, and repeated sipping can be especially troublesome because they keep sugar near the teeth. The issue is not only how much sweetness enters the mouth, but how often it arrives and how long it lingers. A hard sweet held in the cheek, a bottle sipped over hours, a sticky toffee clinging lovingly to molars. All of these create tiny festivals for oral bacteria. The bacteria, naturally, do not care about your childhood joy. They are simply there for the buffet. Public health campaigns begin to warn families about sweets, brushing, and moderation. Fluoride, better dental care, toothbrush habits, and education change outcomes in many places, though access remains unequal. A wealthy child with regular dental visits and fluoridated water lives in a different world from a child without those supports. Sugar is part of the story, but so are poverty, education, healthcare, and infrastructure. Even a cavity has a social history. Weight and metabolism bring a wider storm. As processed foods and sugary drinks become more common, many societies see rising concern about obesity, diabetes, and diet-related disease. Sugar becomes a symbol of excess, especially when consumed in large amounts through beverages and highly processed foods. Yet the science and the public conversation do not always move at the same calm pace. Headlines love villains. Bodies are complicated. Food environments are even more complicated, which is very inconsiderate of them. You stand in a supermarket aisle under bright lights. Shelves are full of cereals, yogurts, sauces, juices, biscuits, meal bars, and soft drinks. The air smells of packaging, coffee, and faint artificial vanilla. Labels speak in whispers and riddles: natural, light, energy, no added sugar, low fat, fortified, family size. Some products marketed as healthy contain surprising sweetness. Others reduce sugar but add alternative sweeteners or refined starches. You turn a package over and read the ingredients. It feels less like shopping and more like decoding a polite little treaty. A quirky tidbit belongs to the old moral language around sugar. In some eras, sweets were not only criticised for harming bodies, but for weakening character, spoiling children, encouraging indulgence, or making people soft. Sugar became a tiny edible test of self-control. This is slightly dramatic for a biscuit, but humans are experts at turning snacks into ethical crises. A child asking for candy could suddenly become a debate about civilization. The child, meanwhile, mostly wants the candy. Historians still argue over how responsibility should be divided between individual choice, corporate marketing, government policy, agriculture, urban life, and culture. Some emphasize personal moderation and education. Others focus on the power of food industries to shape taste, portion size, pricing, and availability. Many scholars point out that choices are made inside environments, and those environments are not neutral. A person can choose what to drink, yes, but the vending machine, the advertisement, the price, the work schedule, and the neighborhood all lean into the choice. You enter a school cafeteria. The floor is sticky in places because children and liquids have formed an ancient alliance. Trays slide along metal rails. The air smells of warm bread, fruit cups, cleaning solution, and something fried. Debates over sugar appear here in practical form. Should schools sell soda? Should flavoured milk be allowed? Are fruit juices healthy? Or just sweetness with a better publicist? How much dessert belongs in a child's day? The question sounds simple until budgets, habits, taste, politics, and hungry children enter the room. Sugar taxes emerge in some countries and cities as governments try to reduce sugary drink consumption. Reformulation follows in some markets, as companies reduce sugar levels to avoid taxes or meet changing consumer expectations. Advertising restrictions, front-of-pack labels, public health guidelines, and school nutrition rules all become tools in the debate. Sugar, once a luxury of kings and a fuel of empire, now appears in committee meetings, nutrition charts, and arguments over serving sizes. It has had quite the career, yet pleasure does not vanish. You sit in a kitchen at night with a slice of birthday cake saved on a plate. The frosting is slightly firm from the refrigerator. The sponge smells of vanilla and butter. You take a bite, and for a moment the debate softens. Sugar is memory. It is celebration. It is a grandmother's jam, a festival sweet, a cup of tea offered in grief, a pastry bought on a rainy afternoon because the day was difficult. To speak honestly about sugar's harms does not require pretending sweetness has no emotional life. The harder question is balance. Modern people often live in environments where sugar is cheap, constant, and cleverly placed. The body still responds to sweetness with pleasure, but the world now offers that pleasure at a scale older humans never faced. Desire that once met seasons and scarcity now meets shelves and screens. The old craving is not sinful. It is simply outnumbered. Evening settles over the city. The dentist's office closes. The supermarket lights remain bright. Somewhere, a parent packs a lunch. Somewhere else, a factory adjusts a recipe. A person stirs one spoonful into tea and decides not to add another. Sugar has become comfort and concern, pleasure and policy, treat and warning. It no longer builds the modern world only through fields and trade. It builds arguments inside kitchens, clinics, schools, and quietly anxious minds. You travel into a present-day sugar landscape where the fields are wide, the machines are loud, and the sweetness seems to belong everywhere at once. Morning rises over cane in Brazil, beet fields in Europe, mills in India, refineries in Thailand, ports in Australia, and supermarkets in almost every city you can name. The air changes with each place humid and grassy near cane, cool and earthy near beets, smoky beside mills, clean and fluorescent under supermarket lights. Sugar is no longer rare, but it is still powerful. It has simply learned to hide in plain sight. You stand first in a Brazilian cane field, where the rows stretch toward a hazy horizon. The leaves shimmer silver-green in the heat. The ground smells of dust, cut stalks, diesel, and warm plant juice. Brazil is one of the world's largest sugarcane producers, and sugarcane there is used not only for sugar, but also for ethanol fuel. That fact changes the meaning of the crop. Cane is no longer only a sweetener for mouths. It can also become energy for engines. The same stalk that sweetens coffee may help move a car. Very ambitious behaviour for a grass. Modern harvesting can look very different from the old hand-cut fields. Large machines move through the rows, chopping cane with mechanical force. You hear metal teeth, engines, and the dry rattle of leaves. Dust rises around the machine. The cut cane is loaded into trucks and carried quickly to mills. In some regions, mechanization has reduced certain forms of harsh manual labour, though it has also changed employment and required capital that smaller producers may not have. Progress arrives wearing steel boots, and it does not step evenly. At the mill, cane is crushed on a vast scale. Juice flows through industrial systems. Bagasse, the fibrous leftover stalk, can be burned to produce power for the mill and sometimes extra electricity. The smell is thick green cane, steam, molasses, hot oil, and smoke. The atmosphere feels both agricultural and industrial, as if a field and a factory shook hands and immediately started negotiating. Sugar emerges as crystals. Ethanol emerges through fermentation and distillation. Molasses, power, animal feed, and other byproducts join the stream. Modern sugarcane is not one product, it is a whole menu of outputs. You move to India, where sugarcane is tied to farming communities, politics, water, mills, and everyday food culture. India is among the largest sugar producers and consumers in the world. Caney fields here may be smallholder-based, woven into village economies and regional power. The air in a village mill area smells of jaggery, smoke, cattle, wet earth, and boiling juice. Jaggery, an unrefined cane sugar made by boiling juice into dense blocks, remains important in many South Asian kitchens. It tastes deeper than refined sugar, with notes of caramel, minerals, and smoke. You hold a piece of jaggery in your palm. It is rough, warm brown, and slightly soft at the edge. When you taste it, sweetness arrives with earthier flavours, not the clean sparkle of white crystals. It feels old and domestic, the kind of sweetness that belongs in winter sweets, festival foods, tea, porridges, and snacks. A quirky tidbit rests here. Jaggery can vary dramatically from batch to batch, depending on cane, soil, boiling technique, and storage. It is sugar with personality, which is delightful unless you're trying to standardize a recipe, and the jaggery has developed opinions. Water is one of the great tensions in today's sugar world. Sugarcane is thirsty. and in regions with water stress, the crop can raise difficult questions about irrigation, policy, farmer livelihoods, and environmental cost. In some places, cane brings income and political influence. In others, it strains rivers, aquifers, and soils. The same field that supports a household may also deepen a regional water debate. Sugar is sweet, but its roots can be very demanding. Historians and economists still argue over how to balance sugar's role in rural livelihoods against its environmental costs. Some emphasize the millions of farmers and workers connected to cane and beet production. Others point to water use, monoculture, soil pressure, pollution from mills, and the climate impact of land use and processing. The answer depends on place, crop system, technology, labour law, and political choice. There is no single global sugar field. There are many, each with its own weather and worries. You travel to Thailand, another major sugar exporter. Cane trucks rumble along roads during harvest season, loaded high with stalks that lean and sway, as if the road itself has become a moving field. The smell near mills is unmistakable sweet, smoky, damp, and slightly fermented. Thailand's sugar industry connects small farmers, mill owners, exporters, domestic food companies, and global markets. Prices rise and fall, weather shifts yields, government policies affect planting. A spoonful of sugar on a distant table may begin with a farmer watching clouds with serious concern. In Europe, beet sugar continues its quieter work. Beet fields spread under grey skies, their leaves low and broad. The harvest smells of cold mud, roots, diesel, and autumn. Factories slice and process the beets into white sugar that looks identical to cane sugar in the bowl. Modern consumers often cannot tell where the sweetness began. Cane and beet meet in the same packet, the same cake, the same cup. Origin dissolves unless labels, politics, or personal values bring it back into view. You enter a global commodity office, less romantic than a field but very influential. Screens glow with prices. Traders watch weather reports, harvest forecast, currency shifts, shipping costs, fuel markets, and policy changes. Sugar is bought and sold through futures markets and long-term contracts. It is food, but also finance. It is crop, but also speculation. Somewhere, rain falls too late or too hard, and numbers change on a screen thousands of miles away. The field becomes data, which is convenient for markets and slightly rude to the field. Sugar today also appears in debates about fair trade, labour rights, sustainability, and corporate responsibility. Certification schemes try to address wages, working conditions, environmental practices, and supply chain transparency. Some producers improve standards. Some companies reformulate products. Some consumers choose less sugar or different kinds. Yet the global system remains uneven. Workers still cut cane by hand in many regions. Small farmers still face debt and price pressure. Mills still dominate local economies. Sweetness remains tied to power. You pause at night in a supermarket aisle in Bangkok, London, Lagos, São Paulo, Toronto, or Sydney. The shelves glow with sauces, snacks, drinks, yogurts, cereals, bakery goods, and plain bags of sugar. The air is cool from refrigeration. A cartwheel squeaks softly. You pick up one packet and feel how ordinary it is, how light, how clean, how silent. Inside a crystal shaped by weather, labour, chemistry, policy, machinery, trade, and craving. The modern sugar world is not one story of luxury anymore. It is fuel, food, livelihood, argument, export, habit, and hidden ingredient. It is everywhere, and that is exactly why it asks to be noticed. You return to a quiet table in a dim room, where a small bowl of sugar rests beside a cup. The crystals look simple, almost shy. They catch the lamplight in pale points, dry and clean against the ceramic. Outside, The night is calm. A distant car passes. Somewhere a pipe ticks in the wall. The room smells of tea, wood, and the faint paper scent of an old book left open nearby. You reach for the spoon, and suddenly this ordinary gesture feels crowded with centuries. Sugar has a strange talent for becoming invisible. Once it is dissolved, you cannot see it. Once it is baked into bread, stirred into sauce, whipped into cream, or hidden inside a drink, it vanishes into texture and habit. Yet its history does not vanish. It remains there, inside the taste, inside the trade routes, inside the fields, inside the factories, inside the laws and longings that helped build the modern world. A small spoonful carries more weight than it admits. Very modest of it, really, considering the amount of trouble it has caused. You sit with the cup warming your hands. The surface of the tea trembles slightly when you breathe. Sugar made sweetness portable, measurable, taxable, profitable, and repeatable. It helped turn distant places into connected economies. It fed fortunes in ports, refineries, plantations, banks, and grocery shops. It shaped the rise of global shipping and insurance. It influenced habits of tea, coffee, chocolate, baking, preserving, candy making, and soft drinks. It moved from medicine to luxury, from luxury to routine, from routine to worry, and from worry into labels, taxes, and health advice. A mainstream historical fact stands clearly in this quiet room. Sugar was one of the major commodities that linked agriculture, slavery, empire, industrialization, and mass consumption. Its history cannot be separated from the growth of Atlantic trade, the violence of plantation systems, the development of refining industries, and the creation of modern food habits. Sugar did not build the modern world alone. Of course, wheat would object, cotton would clear its throat, coal would probably make the room smoky just to be noticed, but sugar helps shape a great deal of it. You touch the rim of the sugar bowl, it feels cool and smooth. This kind of object, so familiar in many homes, would once have seemed impossibly generous. For most of human history, sweetness was seasonal, local, or costly. Now it is so common that people try to avoid it, reduce it, replace it, or read labels carefully to find where it is hiding. That reversal is one of the oddest parts of the story. A rare treasure became a public health concern. History does enjoy a plot twist. A quirky tidbit sits in the emotional life of sugar. People often remember sweetness through place and family more strongly than through politics or trade. A festival sweet made once a year, a grandmother's jam, a paper bag of candy from a corner shop, a birthday cake with uneven icing, a spoonful of sugar in medicine. These memories are not trivial. They show how deeply a global commodity can become personal. Sugar enters the body. Yes, but it also enters memory, which is much harder to regulate. You walk through imagined rooms across time. A healer stirs syrup into a remedy. A merchant weighs a loaf. A plantation worker cuts cane beneath a brutal sun. A refinery labourer watches steam fill a brick building. A child waits outside a sweet shop window. A wartime cook measures the last grains from a rationed packet. A chemist studies syrup under bright lights. A farmer watches rain clouds over cane or beet. Each scene is different, yet each is touched by the same taste. Sweetness becomes a thread pulled through many lives, gentle in the mouth and often harsh in the making. Historians still argue over how to balance sugar's material power with its cultural meaning. Some focus on labour, empire, and capitalism, tracing how sweetness turned land and people into profit. Others emphasize consumption, taste, domestic life, medicine, advertising, or memory. The richest view may be the least tidy. One sugar belongs to all of these histories at once. It is crop, drug, spice, food, symbol, fuel, temptation, comfort, and commodity. It refuses to stay in one jar. You notice the atmosphere softening around the table. The cup has cooled a little. The sugar crystals remain still. There is something peaceful in their smallness, though not innocence. Perhaps that is the lesson. Ordinary things are rarely simple. A spoon, a cup, a cake, a sweet, a packet in a cupboard. Each may hold a world of weather, work, cruelty, invention, pleasure, and forgetting. History is not always hidden in monuments. Sometimes it is stirred in slowly until it disappears. The modern world is full of sweetness, but also full of choices about how to remember it. You can enjoy a dessert without pretending the past was gentle. You can reduce sugar without imagining that craving is shameful. You can look at a field, a factory, or a label and see more than a product. Sugar asks for that kind of attention. Not panic, not purity, just attention. The room grows quieter. The lamp glows low. You take one small sip. Sweetness arrives softly, then fades, leaving warmth behind. Beyond the window, the night holds its breath. The long story of sugar settles back into the bowl, into the cup, into the sleeping world of kitchens and fields. You let the spoon rest. You let the centuries loosen their grip. The crystals shine once, briefly, like tiny stars that have travelled through soil, sea, fire, labour, memory and desire, only to dissolve at last into silence. Now the story slows. The table is still. The cup is warm enough to hold, but not too hot. The night gathers gently around the edges of the room, softening the walls, softening the window, softening even the thoughts that have followed you through fields, harbours, kitchens, mills, and markets. The sugar bowl sits quietly, no longer asking to be weighed, traded, judged, or explained. It's only a pale little shape in the lamplight. You breathe in, you breathe out. The sweetness has faded from the tongue, but a trace of warmth remains, calm and low, like the last glow of a fire under ash. Outside, the world continues in its sleep. Inside, everything grows slower. The spoon rests. The cup cools. The lights dim further, and you drift, gently, into the deep, dark hush of night.